The firefinder was turned. I noticed it before I noticed anything else that morning, before the coffee, before I looked at the sky, because the firefinder sits in the middle of the room on its stand, and you walk around it the way you walk around a table you have had for 30 years. Your hip knows where it is. Your hand goes to it without asking you. The Osborne is a brass and steel thing, about as big across as a truck tire, and it sits on a pedestal in the exact center of the lookout with the map of the district laid flat inside it. It has a ring around the outside marked off in degrees, and a sighting aperture on one side and a crosshair on the other. And when you see a smoke, you swing the ring around until the smoke sits in the crosshair, and you read the number off the ring, and that number is a bearing. Elk Mountain does the same thing from 22 miles east. Where the two lines cross, that is the fire. That is the whole of it. That is the entire reason a man sits in a glass box on top of a mountain for 4 months out of the year. I had left the ring at 270 degrees due west. I always left it at due west because that was where the weather came from, and in the morning the first thing I wanted to see was whether the weather was doing what it had said it would do the night before. That morning the ring was at 116 degrees. I stood there in my socks with a coffee can in my hand, and I looked at the number, and then I bent down and put my eye to the aperture and sighted through the crosshair to see what the thing was pointed at. Southeast. Down the long timbered draw that runs off the point toward Bitter Creek proper, 4 miles of black timber, and then the burn from the '94 fire, gray snags standing up out of the green like whiskers on a jaw. There was no smoke there. There was no anything there. It was 6 in the morning, and the light was still the flat gray light you get before the sun clears the east ridge. And the draw was just the draw. Whoever had turned the ring had put it on a piece of ground where nothing was happening. I want to tell you that I stood there and understood something. I did not. I stood there, and I turned the ring back to 270, and I put my coffee on the shelf under the west window, and I thought, you turned it, and you forgot. 14 seasons, and it never happened once, and now it happened. I was 52 years old. I had started forgetting things that year. Where I set the pliers, whether I had already taken the humidity. Small things, the small things everybody starts losing at the far end of their 40s, and I had been keeping a private tally of them the way you keep a tally of a leak in a roof you cannot afford to fix. So I put it on that. I put it on getting old. The ring turned that night too, while I slept, and it went back to 116 degrees, and it was pointing at the same nothing and the same draw. I did not put that one on anything. Bitter Creek Point sits at 7,400 feet on the last high ground before the country drops off into the wilderness, and the tower is a staffed one, which means somebody sleeps in it. There are lookouts you drive to. Tourists climb the stairs and take a picture and ask you if you get lonely. Bitter Creek is not one of those. Bitter Creek is 9 miles of trail up from the end of Forest Road 1200, and the last 2 miles of that trail are switchbacks cut into scree that a horse hates and a mule tolerates, and a man on foot with a pack curses in a very specific and repetitive way, and there is no water on the mountain. Everything up there gets carried up there. The tower itself is 14 feet by 14 feet, glass on all 4 sides, a hip roof, a catwalk running all the way around the outside. Inside there is a bed, a stool, a propane refrigerator, a 2-burner propane stove, a shelf, a radio, and the Osborne in the middle. Everything you touch you can reach without getting off the stool, if you plan your sitting right. The legs of the bed sit in glass insulators so that if lightning takes the tower you are not part of the circuit, and there is a wooden stool with glass feet on it for the same reason. And in a bad storm you get up on the stool, and you sit there and you do not touch anything, and you wait, and the whole tower rings like somebody hit it with a spoon. You get to the floor of the tower by a set of stairs that runs up the outside of the substructure and comes through a hatch. The hatch is a trap door. It swings up and it lays back flat on the floor, and at night you close it and you drop a bar across it. Not because of anything, because it is a hole in the floor and you do not want to fall through it at 2 in the morning when you get up to look at a lightning strike. 14 seasons. I came up the first time when I was 38, which is late to start. I had been other things. I do not spend a lot of time on the other things. There was a shop in a town I do not go back to, and there was a woman who was reasonable and patient about a great many things, and then one day was not reasonable and patient anymore, and she was right, and I did not fight her about it. I signed a paper, and I drove, and after a while I ran out of money in a town at the bottom of a mountain, and the Forest Service was hiring somebody to sit at the top of it. That is the whole story, and it is not much of one. It is the story of about half the people who take a lookout job. The other half are graduate students and retired school teachers, and a 19-year-old kid who wants to write a book. You can tell which half a lookout is by how long they last. The book kids do 1 season. The school teachers do 3. The ones who are up there because down there did not work do it until their knees give out. My knees were fine. My knees were the last thing about me that was fine. The days had a shape, and the shape did not change, and the shape was the reason the job worked for a man like me. 0800 weather. You go out on the catwalk to the north side where the instrument shelter hangs, a little louvered white box on a bracket, and you open it, and you read the dry bulb and the wet bulb, and you work the humidity off a table, and you read the max and min from the night before, and you look at the rain gauge, and you write it in the log. Then you get on the radio, and you give it to dispatch, Bitter Creek, Yellow Deer Dispatch, with the 0800. Dry bulb 61, wet bulb 52, relative humidity 38%, wind west at 8, no precipitation, visibility unrestricted, 1200, same. 1600, same, and that is the one that matters, because 1600 is when the humidity bottoms out and the fuels are at their driest, and if a fire is going to get up and run, it is going to do it in the 2 hours on either side of that reading. 2000, same, and by then the air has usually laid down and the inversion is setting into the drainages, and you can watch it happen. The cold air pouring down off the high country and pooling blue in the bottoms while the ridges are still gold. And then at 2100, dispatch calls you. They call all the staffed lookouts, one after another, going around the district in the same order every night. Elk Mountain first, then Sawtooth, back when Sawtooth was staffed, then Bitter Creek last, because Bitter Creek was farthest out and the repeater was worst there and it took the longest. That call is not about weather. That call has one purpose. It exists so that if a lookout has a stroke or falls down the stairs or puts a bear through the door, somebody knows about it inside of 24 hours instead of inside of 2 weeks. It is a welfare check. If a lookout does not answer at 2100, dispatch tries again at 2115, and then they try the other lookouts to see if anybody has line of sight or has heard from him. And then at 2200, somebody starts making phone calls. And by midnight, there are 2 engine crew kids in a green rig at the end of Forest Road, 1200, putting on their headlamps, and they are walking up 9 miles of trail in the dark with a radio and a first aid kit, because that is what you do. Nobody had to explain that to me. Every lookout on every district in this country understands that. You answer at 2100. If you do not answer at 2100, other people come up the mountain. There is no version of the job where you simply do not answer. The woman on the other end of that radio for all 14 of my seasons was named Sharon. I never met her. That is the thing about dispatchers. She was a voice, and the voice had a scratch in it. From 30 years of cigarettes, she told me she quit in the spring and picked back up around the 4th of July every single year of her life. And she knew every man and woman on the district by the sound of their transmissions, and could tell you which engine was calling before they gave the number. We talked. Not on the district channel, or not much. But the 2100 check is a slow business, going around the horn, and there are gaps, and over 14 years the gaps add up. I knew that her husband was named Dale, and that he had a back problem, and had been told to lose 40 pounds. and had lost 11. I knew her girl was named Trina and had gone to school in Missoula and come back, and that Sharon had opinions about the coming back that she did not say straight out. I knew about the boy, Petey, who was not really a boy anymore, and who worked at a tire place and was fine, was doing fine, everything is fine, in the voice of a mother who has decided to stop saying the other thing out loud. She called me Coop. Everybody called me Coop. My name is Raymond Cooper. It is on my driver license, and it is on the Forest Service paperwork, and it is on the roster page in the front of the lookout log, where every June the Forest Service requires you to print your legal name and your date of hire and sign under it in ink. I have not answered to Raymond since I was 19 years old. That was my father's name. I do not have a story about him that I want to tell. He was not the worst man in the county. He was in the top 10. He said my name the way you say the name of a tool that keeps slipping in your hand, and when I left, the name was one of the things I left, and it stayed left for 33 years. I want that on the record, before the rest of it. Nobody living called me Raymond. Nobody living knew to... There was one other man on my end of the district that summer, and his call sign was Elk Mountain. His name was Nash, and he was 24 and it was his second season, and he talked too much on the radio, and I liked him, which surprised me. He would call me at odd hours for no reason. Bitter Creek, Elk Mountain. Coop, are you seeing this light on the north end? Bitter Creek, Elk Mountain. Coop, there is an eagle sitting on my roof, and I think he is going to be here a while. He kept a list of the birds he saw and would read it to me sometimes, and I let him, and I would sit on the stool with the microphone in my hand and look at the light on the snags and listen to a young man named Birds. He was going to be a good one. He had the thing you have to have, which is not courage and is not eyesight. It is the ability to look at the same 4,000 square miles of green for 6 hours without your eyes going flat, so that when the one thing changes, you see it change. Sawtooth Butte, 31 miles west-northwest of me, had a lookout on it once. A wooden tower built in 1934 by a crew of boys who were paid $1 a day and their board, and it was staffed every summer until 1971, when the district got an airplane contract and decided that 2 towers could do the work of 3. They took the glass out. They left the frame. It has been falling down for over 50 years, and it is still not all the way down. From my catwalk on a clear day, I could see it with the glasses, a gray splinter standing up off a bald ridge, and I had never once thought about it for longer than it took to look away. And there was Ambrose Teague, who packed for the district. Ambrose was in his 70s and had 4 mules and a bad hip and a way of speaking that used about a third as many words as most people find necessary. Every 2 weeks he brought me water, propane, and groceries, up 9 miles of trail, and he would come up onto the catwalk and drink 1 cup of coffee standing, and look at the country and say something about the grass, and then he would go back down. He never stayed the night. Not once in 14 years, and there was a bed in the storage shed at the bottom of the tower stairs with a mattress on it, and every other packer who ever came up that trail slept in it, because 9 miles down with tired stock at the end of the day is a fool's errand. I asked him about it my second season. I said, Ambrose, why do you always ride out at 4 in the afternoon with 4 tired mules? He looked at the country for a while. Then he said, I like my own bed. That was the whole answer, and I took it for the whole answer because he was 70 and he had a bad hip, and it was a reasonable thing for a man like that to say. The logbooks are the last thing I need to lay out. There is a stack of them on the shelf under the east window, and they go back to 1946, which is when the current tower replaced the one the boys built. They are green cloth ledgers with the Forest Service shield stamped on them, and they have a column for date and a column for time and columns for dry bulb, wet bulb, humidity, wind, precipitation, and visibility, and then a wide column at the right side of the page headed remarks. Every lookout who ever sat in that box filled those columns 4 times a day, 4 months a year, for going on 80 years. Almost all of it is weather. Column after column of numbers written by dead people. Halverson, who was there from 46 to 52, and wrote in a hand like a doctor. A woman named D. Rasmussen, 58 through 62, who wrote in a hand like a schoolteacher and used the remarks column to record every bird she saw, which is a thing I never told Nash because he would have gotten unbearable about it. Pruitt, who was there through most of the 70s and 80s and did not write a single word in the remarks column for 11 years. I read them at night. That is what I did with my evenings for 14 years. After the 2100 check, I would light the lamp and take a book off the stack and read the weather of 1953 out loud to myself, because a man alone in a glass box either talks or he stops being able to. I need that on the table because it matters later, and because it is the thing I am ashamed of, and it is not the thing a man expects to be ashamed of. I talk to myself constantly, out loud, all day, every day, for 4 months a year, for 14 years. I narrated my own coffee. I said the weather of the dead out loud into an empty room. Every June, when I signed in, I would read the roster page out loud the way you do when there is nobody to hear it, and the roster page said Raymond Cooper, and I said it aloud, in my own voice, in that room, once a year for 14 years. Nobody living called me Raymond. I did. The one book I went back to more than the others was Carl Ostrander's. Ostrander was there in 1967 and 1968. His handwriting was small and square, and he never wasted a stroke. And for 2 seasons he filled out the weather columns the way you would want a man to fill them out and put nothing at all in the remarks. Then, in the last 2 weeks of August in 1968, he started putting one word in. Nothing under remarks. On the 12th of August, after the 1600 observation, in that small square hand, nothing. The 13th, nothing. The 14th, nothing. It runs for 8 days like that. Weather, 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 and then one word in the remarks column, the same word, 8 times, and the word gets smaller each day. By the 18th, it is so small you have to hold the page up to the window. And then the entry for the 20th of August, 1968, which is the last thing Carl Ostrander ever wrote in that book. He took his 1600 weather, he wrote it out, and then in the remarks column, in letters bigger than any letters on the page, he wrote something, did not answer, and that is the end of the book. Half the pages are blank. The next entry is in June of 1969, in a different hand. I looked Ostrander up once, in the district office, on a rainy day in October when the season was over and I had time to kill. In a filing cabinet in front of me, there was a personnel card. It said he was hired in 1967. It said he separated from service on the 21st of August, 1968. Under reason for separation, somebody had typed the word abandoned, and then somebody else later in pen had crossed that out and written did not return. I thought about that for a week, and then I stopped thinking about it, because I decided that Carl Ostrander was a man who spent too long alone in a small room and started hearing the room breathe, and that he walked down the mountain one morning and did not tell anybody and got on a bus. It happens. It has happened to lookouts every year since there have been lookouts. That is what I decided. I want it understood that I decided it, and that I was pleased with myself for deciding it, the way you are pleased with yourself when you find a reasonable explanation and it lets you go to sleep. I said that page out loud too, more than once, in my own voice in that room. The firefinder turned 3 more times in the last week of June. Each time it went to 116 degrees. Each time I set it back to 270 before I did anything else, and each time I stood a minute with my hand on the ring, because the thing you have decided to stop worrying about takes a certain amount of hand time to stay decided. I checked the trapdoor. It was barred every morning, exactly the way I had barred it. I checked the windows. The windows in a lookout are the whole wall hinged at the top, and you prop them open in the day with sticks, and you drop them at night, and they were dropped. I checked the catwalk door, locked. So I decided it was me I decided I was getting up in the night and turning it the way people sleepwalk, and I decided this without any evidence and against the fact that I had never sleepwalked in my life. Because the other thing you can decide is that somebody is coming into a locked room on top of a mountain 9 miles from a road, and you cannot live in a 14-foot box with that decision. I started tying a piece of orange flagging around the ring at night, threaded through the sighting aperture so that the ring could not turn without the flagging binding up on the pedestal. In the morning, the flagging was on the shelf, folded. I mean folded. Not knotted, not torn, not chewed. Somebody had taken a 2-foot piece of orange plastic ribbon off a brass ring and folded it in half, and then in half again, and set it on the shelf under the east window on top of the stack of logbooks, square with the edge of the shelf, and the ring was at 116 degrees. I stood in that room a good while that morning. I did not do the 0800 weather. That is the only observation I missed in 14 seasons, and I missed it by 20 minutes. And I called it in late and told Sharon I had overslept. And she said something about how I was getting old, and I laughed, and it came out of me sounding like a cough. I did the only thing there was to do, which was to take the country apart with the binoculars. 9 miles of trail. Nobody hikes it for fun. There are no lakes at the top of it. It is a hot, dry ridge with a tower on it, and the only reason to walk up there is to see a man in the tower. I glassed the trail, every switchback of it I could see, and I glassed the meadow at the bottom of the point, and I glassed the black timber in the draw, and I glassed the burn. I found nothing, because you do not find anything, because 4,000 square miles is a lot of ground, and a man in it is smaller than a stump. But I will tell you what I did find, because it was nothing, and it stopped me cold. I looked at the burn scar down the southeast draw, the one the firefinder kept pointing at, the gray snag standing in the green. And I put the glasses on the middle of it and swept slow, the way you do, back and forth. And about halfway through the third pass, a snag moved. Not fell, moved. About a foot to the left, and then it was a snag again. I held on that spot for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I looked at my watch when I started, and I looked at my watch when I gave up and my arms were burning. The snag stayed a snag. Every other snag in that burn stayed a snag too. I put the glasses down and I said, out loud, to nobody, in an empty glass room on top of a mountain, it was a bird landing on it. That is what I said, out loud, in my voice. Ambrose came up on the 3rd of July with the mules. He came up the last switchback about 11 in the morning, and I heard the stalk before I saw them, the particular unhurried clatter of iron shoes on scree, and I went down the stairs and helped him unload, which was 5 cases of water and 2 propane bottles and a box of groceries, and my mail, which was a seed catalog and a letter from the Forest Service about my retirement contribution. He looked tired. He was 74 that year, and he looked it for the first time, and I made him sit down on the step of the storage shed instead of standing on the catwalk, and I brought the coffee down to him. We talked about the grass, which is what we talked about. The grass was better than last year. It had been a wet May. Then I told him about the firefinder. I do not know why I told him. I had made a decision not to tell anybody, on the grounds that a man who tells the district that his instruments are turning themselves at night gets a nice phone call from somebody at the office in October about whether he might like to think about a different kind of work. But Ambrose was sitting there on that step with his hat in his hand, and the mules were pulling at the grass, and the whole world was as ordinary as a Tuesday, and it came out of me. I made it funny. I said the ring was turning, and I was probably doing it in my sleep, and I was going to have to start tying myself to the bed. He did not laugh. He looked at his coffee for a while. Then he said, "What bearing?" I said, 116. Ambrose Teague set his cup down on the step. He did it carefully, the way a man does when he is buying time with his hands. Then he stood up, and he put his hat on, and he looked at the mules for a while like he was counting them, and then he looked up at the tower, not at me. At the tower, and then at the catwalk, and then along the catwalk to the corner over the trapdoor, and he stood there looking at that corner for about as long as it takes to say the alphabet. And then he said, "I have got to get down." It was 11:30 in the morning. He had come up in 3 hours. He had never once left before 4. I said, "Ambrose, it is 11:30. He said, "I know what time it is." And he threw the empty panniers on, and he cinched them, and he got up on the horse with more speed than his hip had any business allowing, and he took the mules down the trail. He stopped once. He was maybe 40 yards down at the first turn, and he pulled up and turned in the saddle, and he called back up to me. He had to raise his voice, and it did not sound like his voice raised. It sounded like a different man's voice altogether, and I have thought about that since. He said, "Coop, when they call you at night, do not go looking for who else it might be." I said, "What?" He said, "Just answer the radio. Do not go out." Then he rode down, and I stood there in the grass with 2 coffee cups in my hands. I have run that back 1,000 times. I have taken it apart word by word. And here is what I have come to. Ambrose Teague knew exactly one thing about what was on that mountain, and it was not enough. He knew a rule, and he did not know why the rule worked. And he gave me the rule, the way you hand a man a wrench when you can see the bolt but cannot reach it. Answer the radio, do not go out. The rule was good. The rule kept a man alive for a while. The rule was not the law. He never came back up. The district sent a different packer on the 17th, a kid named Whitehorse with 2 mules and a Bluetooth speaker on his saddle horn playing music I did not know, and when I asked after Ambrose, he said the old man had put in for medical. The first time I heard something on the catwalk was the 9th of July. There is a particular sound a boot makes on the catwalk boards, and after 14 years I could tell you which side of the tower a man was on with my eyes shut, because the boards on the north side are newer and they do not talk, and the boards on the west side over the stair landing have a spring in them, and the southeast corner has one board that pops. At about 2 in the morning I came awake because somebody walked past the west windows. I lay in the bed with my eyes open and my heart doing what a heart does, and I listened, and the steps went around the corner and along the south side and around the southeast corner, and the board popped, and they came up the east side and around the north and past the west windows again. A man walking the catwalk of that tower all the way around at a normal pace takes 31 steps. I know that the way I know the number of stairs in my mother's house. I have walked it in the dark 10,000 times. I counted 34. Not 31 in a shuffle. Not 31 and then a pause and 3 more. 34 even steps at even spacing all the way around one time, which meant that whatever was walking my catwalk had a stride about 3 inches shorter than a man's, or it had more feet than a man. I did not let that thought finish. I got out of the bed, and I got the pistol out of the drawer under the shelf, an old revolver I kept up there for porcupines under the substructure, and had never once fired at anything. And I stood in the middle of the room with my back against the firefinder, and I waited. It walked the catwalk 4 more times, 34 steps each time, same speed, same direction. It never stopped at a window. It never touched the glass. It walked the tower like a man walking a fence line he means to fix in the morning. Then it stopped at the southeast corner on the board that pops, and the board popped and it did not pop again. I stood there in the dark until the sky went gray and my hand had gone numb around that pistol grip. At first light I went out. There was nothing. The catwalk was clean. There was frost on the rail and it was unbroken all the way around, and there was no track in it, and the frost on the top step of the stairs was unbroken too. I want to be careful here, because this is where a man in a story usually decides something. He decides it was a bear, or he decides he is losing his mind. I did not decide anything. I made breakfast. I took the 0800 weather and I called it in, and Sharon said, "Good morning, Coop," and I said, "Good morning, Sharon," and I gave her the dry bulb and the wet bulb and the humidity, and I put a hasp and a padlock on the inside of the trap door that afternoon using a hasp I had brought up for the propane cabinet, and I told myself while I was doing it that it was for porcupines. I said that out loud too, screwdriver in my hand, kneeling on the floor over the hole. Porcupines. Whatever was out there had heard every word I had said in that tower for 14 years, and it had been listening the whole time, and it had a very good memory, and I was still handing it words. On the 14th of July, the radio gave me a smoke report from Sawtooth Butte. Here is how the district channel works. Everybody hears everybody. When Elk Mountain calls in a smoke, I hear it, and dispatch hears it, and the engines hear it, and the two lookouts start swinging their firefinders and calling bearings, and dispatch draws the lines on a map and sends somebody. It was 22 minutes after 4 in the afternoon, the hottest part of a hot day. I had just finished the 1600 weather, and I was sitting on the stool with my elbows on the window ledge, looking at nothing, which is the job. The radio said, "Yellow Deer dispatch, Sawtooth." I did not move. There was a 2-second gap, and then Sharon came back. "Station calling, say again." The radio said, "Yellow Deer dispatch, Sawtooth Butte," with a smoke. The voice was a man's voice. It was clear. There was no static on it at all, which is its own kind of wrong, because Sawtooth Butte is on the far side of a ridge from the repeater, and any transmission from there ought to be chopped to pieces. Sharon said, "Who is this?" The radio said, "Sawtooth Butte, bearing 116 degrees, and then it did not say anything else. I was on my feet. I did not remember standing up. I had the microphone in my hand and my thumb on the key, and I did not press it. And the reason I did not press it is that a thing had happened in my chest that I have to describe carefully, because it is the whole of what I understood that summer, and I did not understand it yet. Sawtooth Butte, bearing 116 degrees. Sawtooth is west-northwest of me. Bitter Creek is east-southeast of Sawtooth. A bearing of 116 degrees off Sawtooth Butte does not point into the burn in the draw. It points at my tower. Sharon came back on after a while. She was using her flat voice, the one she used for the engine crews. She said, "All stations, disregard. We have got somebody on the district channel who should not be on it." She said, "Elk Mountain, do you copy?" Nash said, "Elk Mountain copies," and he sounded young. She said, "Bitter Creek, do you copy?" And I stood there with the microphone in my hand. Everything in me said, "Do not put your voice on this channel." And underneath that, quieter and older and better trained, the thing the Forest Service had spent 14 years building into me said, "You answer when dispatch calls." I keyed the microphone. I said, "Bitter Creek copies." And the radio said, in a voice that was not mine, but that had all my parts in it, the way a photograph of your father has all your parts in it, and with no static at all, "Bitter Creek copies." Sharon said, "All right, that is enough." And she switched the district to a different channel, and the whole thing went in a report. And by the end of the week, 2 guys from the Forest Service law enforcement office were talking about somebody with a scanner and a mobile rig on a 2-track somewhere, and how they were going to find them. They were not going to find them. I did not sleep that night. I sat on the stool with the glass feet with the pistol on my knee, and I watched the trapdoor. Nothing came. At about 3 in the morning, I understood, with the flat clarity you get at 3 in the morning, why nothing had come. It had heard my voice on the radio. It had gotten what it came for. It had gone off somewhere to work on it. The next 12 days were the best weather of the summer and the worst 12 days of my life up to that point, and I did my job. I want that understood, because it is the only thing about that summer I am not ashamed of. I took the weather 4 times a day. I called it in. I sat on the stool and I looked at 4,000 square miles of green, with my eyes not going flat. And on the 19th, I picked up a lightning start in the cut bank drainage 9 minutes after it lit, and gave dispatch a bearing that was good within a degree. And Elk Mountain crossed me, and they put 2 smoke jumpers on it before dark, and it never got bigger than a 1/4 acre. Sharon said, "Nice catch, Coop." I said, "Thank you." And every night at 2100 I answered the radio, and every night the answer cost me a little more, because I had started to understand what an answer was. What it was doing took me a while. I worked it out slow, over those 12 days, the way you work out a leak by watching a stain. The first week of July, it walked my catwalk in the dark, It did not knock. It did not test a window. It walked the tower like a man learning a building. And then it stopped, and I had 11 quiet nights, and during those 11 nights it was not gone. It was up on that burn scar, or down in that draw, or standing in my meadow at 3 in the morning while I slept, doing the only thing it ever did. It was listening. Everything it ever gave back to me, I gave to it first. It gave me a voice on the radio that had all my parts in it, and I had been putting my voice on that radio 4 times a day for 14 years, and out into that empty room 1,000 times a day besides. It gave me a bearing of 116 degrees, and 116 degrees off Sawtooth is my tower, and Sawtooth is a name I had said out loud maybe 40 times in 14 years, telling myself the history of the district on winter nights that never got cold enough to be winter. It gave me the firefinder turned to a piece of ground where nothing was. The firefinder is the instrument that answers the question where the whole tower exists to answer that question. And it had turned that instrument over and over to a spot in the draw and left it there for me to find. And the first thing I had done every single time before the coffee, before the weather, was put my eye to the aperture and look where it wanted me to look. That was practice. It was practicing on me. Not to make me look at the burn, to make me answer a question I had not been asked. On the 24th of July at 2:10 in the afternoon, I saw the man in the burn scar. He was standing on a bald knob 4 miles down the draw where the '94 fire had run over the top and left the ground gray and open. I had the glasses on that country, 'cause I had the glasses on all my country all day. He was a long way off, at 4 miles through 15 power glasses, on a hot afternoon with the air boiling up off the rock. A man is not a face. He is a posture. He is a shape, and the way the shape stands. He was standing with his feet apart and his elbows up and glasses to his eyes, looking back at me. I did not move. He did not move. I have been glassed before. Hunters do it. Every fall, somebody on a ridge 4 miles out picks up the flash of my windows and puts a scope on me, and I put the glasses on him, and we look at each other for a minute, and then we both go on with our lives. This was not that. I stood on the catwalk and looked at him, and he stood on that knob and looked at me, and after about a minute of it, I got tired of it, and I took the glasses down. He took his glasses down. I got a cold thing at the base of my skull, and I put my glasses back up. He put his glasses back up. I raised my left hand. 4 miles away, on a bald burn knob, a man raised his right hand, and it was the same hand, because a mirror gives you your right hand when you raise your left. I stood there, and I did not raise anything else, and I did not lower anything, and after about half a minute the man lowered his glasses and turned and walked off the knob into the standing snags at a normal walking pace, and he was gone, and I stayed on that catwalk until the light went red. I called it in. I want that on the record. I called Sharon, and I told her I had a subject 4 miles southeast in the '94 burn, glassing the tower, and she took it seriously. And law enforcement flew a plane over that country 2 days later and found nothing. No vehicle, no camp, no fire ring, and the nearest road to that knob is 11 miles. The plane pilot said something on the radio that I did not think about for another week. He said, "Bitter Creek, there is no way anybody walked into that." He said, and there is no way anybody walked out. The name came on the 2nd of August. 2100. The check. Sharon went around the district the way she always did, and I sat on the stool with the microphone in my hand and the lamp not lit yet, watching the last of the light go off the snags, waiting my turn. She called Elk Mountain. Nash answered. He told her about a bird. She called Bitter Creek, and she said, "Bitter Creek, Yellow Deer Dispatch. You there, Ray?" I sat on that stool with my thumb on the key, and I did not press it. The radio said, "Bitter Creek, Yellow Deer. Ray, you copy." Sharon's voice. Sharon's scratch in it. The way she came down a half step on the last word of a sentence. Sharon, who had called me Coop 4 times a day for 14 years, who did not know I had another name, who would have had to go into a personnel file in a locked cabinet in a building in a town 90 miles away to find out that Raymond Cooper was a person, and who would not have used it if she had found it, because that is not how anybody talks on a radio. Ray, my father in the doorway of a shop with a rag in his hand. Ray, get over here. Ray, you copy. I did not answer. The silence went on. 15 seconds. 30. And that was wrong too, because if a lookout does not answer, dispatch does not sit there breathing. Dispatch calls again with the call sign, twice, and then dispatch calls the other lookout. At 40 seconds, the radio said, Bitter Creek, Yellow Deer, dispatch, 2100 check, do you copy? It was Sharon. It was Sharon. I knew it in my body before I knew it in my head, the way you know your own front door in the dark. The scratch was there, but there was a fatigue under it, and a little sound at the front of the transmission that was her chair, that cheap office chair she had complained about for 4 seasons, and the thing in the burn had never sat in that chair. I keyed the microphone, and my voice came out of me like it had been left out in the rain. I said, Bitter Creek copies. All secure. She said, You all right, Coop? Coop. I said I was fine. I said the repeater was acting up. She said, Yeah, it has been all week. She said, Get some sleep, hon. And she went off the air, and I sat in the dark with the microphone in my lap, and I did the arithmetic that I had been refusing to do since the 9th of July. At 2100, on my radio, in Sharon's voice, something had called me Ray. There was one place in the world it could have gotten that name. It was written on the roster page in the front of the current logbook, in my own printing, in ink. And every June, on the first day of the season, sitting alone on that stool with the book open on my knee, I would say that page out loud, all of it. The way you read anything out loud when there is nobody to hear it and you have not used your voice in 8 months and you want to make sure it still works. Raymond Cooper, date of hire, signature, 14 times. It had not learned my name off the radio, because my name has never once been on the radio. It had learned it standing outside a window in June listening to a lonely man read to himself. The knocking started on the 6th of August, and it was polite, and that was the worst thing about it. I had gone to bed at 10. The lamp was out. The trapdoor was barred and padlocked, and I had, over the course of the previous week, put a second bar across it, made out of a section of steel pipe from the shed. And I had done all this the way a man does a thing he does not want to explain to himself. At 20 minutes past 2, I woke up because somebody knocked on the trapdoor. 3 knocks. From underneath. Knuckles on wood. A completely ordinary, apologetic, sorry to bother you kind of knock. The knock of a neighbor who has locked himself out. And then Ambrose Teague's voice from underneath my floor said, Coop, it is me. I did not move. I lay on my side with my face toward the wall, and I did not move, and I did not breathe out, and the room was so quiet that I could hear the propane refrigerator ticking. The knock came again. 3. Same pressure, same spacing. Ambrose said, Coop, my hip has gone out on me. I am on the stairs. And there is a piece of it I have never been able to hand to anybody who was not there. Everything in me wanted to answer, not to open the door, to answer, to say Ambrose, to say I am here, to say the one syllable that a human being says when a human being says his name in the dark, and I had my mouth open, and there was a word coming up out of my chest with its own engine, and it had nothing at all to do with what I believed, or knew, or had worked out on my stool with my glasses in my hands. It was in my throat, and it was going to come out. I put my forearm across my own mouth. I lay in that bed, and I bit down on my own arm hard enough that I had the bruise into September. And the knock came a 3rd time, and Ambrose said, Coop, please. And after a while, it went down the stairs. It went down the stairs the way a 74-year-old man with a bad hip goes downstairs. It took the landing slow. I could hear the hitch in it. Then it was in the grass, and it walked out into the meadow, and about 60 yards out it stopped, and it stood there for 4 hours. I know it stood there for 4 hours because I lay in that bed, and I listened to my own watch, and I did not sleep, and at some point around 4 in the morning, it said, in my own voice, at a conversational volume, from 60 yards out in the dark, "Porcupines." And I understood then exactly how long it had been standing outside that tower, and exactly how much of me it had. The 7th, 8th, and 9th of August were the siege, though I did not have that word for it then. It stopped being polite. It came at 2100. That is the part I need to make plain, because that is the trap, and the trap is what makes this story mean anything. On the 7th, at 3 minutes to 2100, the radio went to hash, not silence. A wall of static, a scouring, the sound of 100 million things at once, and it did not come and go the way Skip does. It sat on the channel, and through it, faint, in the way of a station far off, I could hear Sharon calling Elk Mountain, and I could hear Nash answering, and it was like listening to people talk in another room in a house that is on fire. At 2100 exactly, the static stopped, and out on the catwalk, on the other side of the glass, 4 feet from my head, Sharon said, "Bitter Creek, Yellow Deer dispatch, 2100 check." I could not see her. The windows are glass, and the room was dark, and the night was dark, and there was nothing out there but the shape of the rail and the country falling away black underneath it. She said it again. The voice was on the catwalk, at the level of a mouth, and it moved. It went along the west side and around to the south, and it said the words at the pace a dispatcher says them. And the third time she said it, she added, "Coop, come on now." I sat on the stool with the glass feet in the middle of that room with the microphone in my hand, and I looked at the radio. The radio was quiet. The channel was open and quiet, and my radio was working. And I knew it was working because the little red light was on, and 40 seconds later I heard, coming out of that speaker, 90 miles away in a room with a bad chair, the real Sharon. She said, "Bitter Creek, Yellow Deer, 2100 check, do you copy?" And on the catwalk at the same moment, the other one said, "Do you copy?" They said it together. They were half a beat off, like a song played on 2 radios in 2 rooms. And I finally understood the shape of the thing that had been built around me over 6 weeks, patiently, the way you build a corral around stock that does not know it is being corralled. If I answered the radio, I answered the thing on the catwalk. It could not tell one from the other. Nobody could. My voice going out that window was my voice going out that window. And if I did not answer the radio, at 21:15, Sharon would call me again, and at 2200 she would start making phone calls. And by midnight, 2 kids off the Yellow Deer engine crew, 20 and 22 years old, would be standing at the end of Forest Road 1200 with headlamps and a first aid kit, starting up 9 miles of trail in the dark, calling my name into the timber the whole way. Calling my name, answering everything that answered them. I keyed the microphone. I said, "Bitter Creek copies, all secure." Out on the catwalk, in my own voice, something said, "All secure." And then it laughed, and the laugh was mine too, and I had not laughed in that tower for a long time, and it took me a minute of sitting there in the dark to remember when. It was the night Nash read me his bird list. Nash called me at 6:10 the next morning on the district channel, and he was scared and trying not to sound it. He said, "Bitter Creek, Elk Mountain." He said, "Coop, did you call me last night?" I said no. He was quiet. Then he said, "Somebody called me at about 11 on the district. It said, Elk Mountain, Bitter Creek." And I answered, and it did not say anything else. And then about an hour later did it again. I sat on the stool and looked at 22 miles of morning air between my mountain and his, and I thought about how sound travels, and how it does not. And I thought about a young man alone in a glass box with a bird list. I said, "What did you say to it?" He said, "What?" I said, "When it called you the second time, what did you say?" He said, I said, "Coop, is that you?" I closed my eyes. He said, "Coop, are you all right up there? I can be over there by dark. I could get Whitehorse to run me around to 1200 and come up." And I did not have any way in the world to explain to that kid why the single most dangerous thing he could do that day was walk up my trail with my name in his mouth. I said, Nash. I said it slow. I said, do not come over here. I said, do not answer the radio to anything that does not say a call sign. I said, if it says your name, do not answer. There was a long gap. He said, Elk Mountain copies. And I want to say that he stayed off my mountain because he trusted me. And maybe that is true. But I think the truth is that he had heard something at 11 at night and again at midnight, and some part of him had already decided, and all I did was give him permission. That afternoon I sat down on the stool and I stopped being a man that things were happening to, and I did the only thing I have ever been any good at, which is to look at a thing for a long time without letting my eyes go flat. I laid it out the way you lay out a fire. What is it doing? What does it want? What does it need? It wanted me outside. That was Ambrose's rule, and Ambrose was right as far as he went. Everything it had done for 6 weeks was aimed at getting my boots on the catwalk stairs, the knock at the trap door, Ambrose on the landing with his hip out, Sharon 4 feet from my head. Every one of those was a hand held out in the dark, but that was not the shape of it. That was only the last thing in the shape. Because a bear wants you outside too, and a bear stands in the meadow and huffs. This thing did not want a man in a meadow. It could have had me in a meadow any afternoon in 14 years. It wanted me to answer. Everything. From the beginning. The firefinder turned to a bearing with nothing on it, 3 mornings running, and me bending down over the aperture every time to look where it pointed. Because the ring had asked me a question and my whole training was to answer it with my eye. That was the first one. That was the little one. And I had answered it 6 times before I ever knew it had been asked. The voice on the district channel giving a bearing off a tower that has been dead since 1971, and Sharon saying, station calling, say again, a question, and then Bitter Creek, do you copy? And I keyed the microphone and said Bitter Creek copies, and it took my voice off the air and folded it up and put it in its pocket, the way it had folded that orange flagging. The man on the knob raising his hand when I raised mine. That was not mockery. That was a demonstration. It was showing me what it did, and I did not have the sense to read it. And underneath, every single one of them, running back 14 years, was a man, alone, in a glass box, reading The Weather of the Dead out loud to himself for company. And there was one fact I had spent 6 weeks refusing to look at, and I looked at it that afternoon, and it turned the whole summer over. It had been inside my tower. In the last week of June, it had come through a barred door, or a dropped window, or some way I do not know, into a 14-foot room with a man asleep in it, and it had taken a piece of orange ribbon off a brass ring and folded it twice and squared it up on a shelf. That is all it did. It stood over me while I slept, and it folded a ribbon, and it left. A thing that can do that does not need a man to open a door. It never needed the door. It could have had me in the last week of June, and it did not want me, and the 6 weeks since had not been a siege at all. It had been a schooling. It could not make a sound it had never heard. Everything it had ever used on me, I had handed it. Sharon's voice came off my radio. Ambrose's voice came off my catwalk on a July morning. My own voice came off everything. 4 months, a year, 14 years. The one voice it had never once used, in 6 weeks of using every voice it had, was a woman's voice that was not Sharon's. It never used my wife's voice. It had 33 years of my life to work with, and it never used hers, because I had never said one word of hers, out loud, in that room. Not once. I had thought about her 10,000 times in that tower, and I had never let one syllable of her out into the air, and the thing standing in the meadow in the dark did not know she existed, because the only thing it knew about me was what I had said. That was the law. It is not a wise law. Nobody handed it to me on a porch. I worked it out on a stool with my hands on my knees on the 8th of August, and I was so tired that when I understood it, I laughed, and then I stopped laughing fast, because I did not want to give it that one again either. It has no mouth of its own. It has mine, and the way out was not to be silent, because a silent lookout brings two boys up a trail in the dark, and it was not to fight it, because I had a revolver with 5 rounds in it, and I had watched a snag move on a ridge 4 miles away. The way out was to go down that mountain saying nothing that belonged to me. I called Sharon at 8 the next morning. I did it the way I have done everything hard in my life, which is straight through the middle at a walk. I said, Yellow Deer Dispatch, Bitter Creek. I said, Sharon, I am coming off the hill. I said, I am resigning effective today, and I will be at the end of 1200 by 2 o'clock this afternoon, and I will drive myself out, and I will call the district from town. There was the sound of that chair. She said, Coop. I said, I know. She said, Honey, has something happened up there? I said, No. She said, Then what in the hell? And I said the only true sentence I said on the radio that summer. I said, Sharon, if I stay another night, I am going to answer the door. She did not say anything for a while. Then she said, All right. Then she said, Do you want somebody to come up and help you carry? I said, No. I said, I want you to promise me nobody comes up that trail. Not today, not tomorrow. Nobody comes up. I will be down. She said, Coop, that is not procedure. I said, Promise me. The chair again. And Sharon, who had never in 14 years been anything but the sound of a room with a coffee maker in it, and a woman who wanted to know if I had eaten, said in a voice I did not know she had, Yeah, okay, nobody goes up. I said, Thank you. And she said, Be careful on the scree. I did the 0800 weather, because there was no reason not to. Dry bulb 64, wet bulb 50, humidity 29%, wind southwest at 6, no precipitation, visibility unrestricted. I wrote it in the log in the columns and I left the remarks blank. Then I took Carl Ostrander's book off the shelf and I put it in my pack. I did not take much else. I took the pistol and I took my knife and I took 2 bottles of water. And I left my clothes and my books and the seed catalog and a good pair of boots. And I left the fire finder at 270 degrees. And I closed the shutters and I shut the door and I went down the stairs and through the trap door at 9:10 in the morning with the sun already hot on the boards. There was no frost to read. There was nothing in the grass. The meadow was a meadow. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs and I opened the pack and I got the logbook out. And I opened it to the summer of 1967, which is a season in which nothing happened at all. And I started walking and started reading. I read out loud. Every step, 9 miles. August 2nd, 1967, 0800. Dry bulb 58, wet bulb 51. Relative humidity 62%. Wind calm. No precipitation. Visibility unrestricted. August 2nd, 1967, 1200, dry bulb 71, wet bulb 56, relative humidity 34%, wind northwest at 4. I did not say my name. I did not say Ambrose, or Sharon, or Nash. I did not say hello, and I did not say what do you want, and I did not say leave me alone. Every word that came out of my mouth for 9 miles belonged to a man who had been dead longer than Nash had been alive, and every word of it was a number about the air. It came with me at about the second switchback. It was in the timber off the downhill side, 30 yards out, keeping pace, and it did not try to hide the sound of it, and it did not sound like a bear, or an elk, or a man. It sounded like a thing walking. And it never once broke stride the whole way down that mountain, not on the scree, not through the deadfall, not across the 200 yards of blowdown at the 4-mile bench where I had to climb over 11 trees on my hands and knees with a logbook in my teeth. August 14th, 1967, 1600. Dry bulb 82, wet bulb 54. At the third switchback, it said, Coop, relative humidity 19%. It said, Coop, my hip has gone out on me. Wind southwest at 11, gusting to 20. It said, Bitter Creek, Yellow Deer Dispatch, 2100 check. No precipitation. It said, Coop, is that you? Visibility unrestricted. That was Nash. That was the sentence, Nash said, into a radio at midnight on the 7th of August, alone in a glass box 22 miles from me, and I had asked him what he said to it, and he had told me, and now the thing in the timber had it, and I had to keep my mouth full of dead weather to keep from saying that boy's name. August 15th, 1967, 0800. At the 6-mile mark, the trail comes out of the timber and crosses a long open side hill of bare grass, and the sun was straight up, and I could see for a mile in 3 directions, and there was nothing in any of them, and it walked with me across that open side hill, and there was nothing there to walk. Dry bulb 60, wet bulb 54, relative humidity 71%. At about 7 miles, it stopped being clever. It went quiet for 400 yards, and I kept reading. And my voice had gone to rags by then, and I was reading numbers to a hot, empty trail, and then from directly behind me, close, at the distance a man stands when he wants to be heard and not seen, a voice said, "Ray, get over here." My father died in 1991. He had been dead 35 years. There is no recording of him anywhere on this earth. But I had sat in that tower on a January thaw of a night, in some year I cannot even place, and I had gone down into the bad drawer, the way a man alone does about once every 4 seasons, and I had said it out loud. All of it. His words and his voice, the way you do, the way you cannot help doing, sitting alone at 2 a.m. with a lamp and no one to hear you. I had done his voice for it. I had rehearsed him. I did not turn around. I did not stop walking. Somewhere in my chest, a 19-year-old boy was already saying, "Yes, sir," and I put my forearm over my mouth again, and I bit down on the same bruise, and I looked at the page. "Wind calm," I said. "No precipitation. Visibility unrestricted." And I walked. It came the last 2 miles right behind me, not 30 yards off. Right behind me, close enough that when the trail switched back I could hear it turn, and it said my name in every voice it had ever collected. It said Ray in my father's voice, and Coop in Sharon's, and Coop in Ambrose's, and Coop, "Is that you?" in Nash's. And at the very end, at the last quarter-mile where the trail flattens, and you can see the sun on the roof of your own truck through the trees, it said, in the voice of a man narrating his own coffee in a glass room at 7 a.m. for 14 years. Porcupines. And it laughed, and the laugh was mine. June 11th, 1967, I said. 0800, dry bulb 49, wet bulb 44. The trailhead is a wide spot at the end of Forest Road 1200 with a rail and a sign and room for 3 vehicles. My truck was there where I had left it in the first week of June, with the tires soft and a bird nest under the hood. And there was a green Forest Service rig parked beside it, and a kid in a yellow shirt leaning on the tailgate. He was maybe 20, engine crew. He had a radio on his chest strap, and he was drinking a Gatorade, and he pushed off the tailgate when I came out of the trees, and he looked at me the way young men look at a man who has come down off a mountain with a logbook in his hand, and no pack and blood on his forearm. Sharon had promised nobody would come up. She had kept it. She had sent one kid to sit at the bottom. He said, "You, Cooper?" And I stood in the sun in the parking lot at the end of Forest Road, 1200, 12 feet from a living human being who had asked me a question and was waiting, with his hand already coming out, and my whole life came up my throat. 52 years of it. Every teacher who ever called roll. Every foreman. Every time a woman said my name in a kitchen and waited. I said, "Yeah, that is all." One word. Half a second. And out of the timber behind me, from about 40 feet back up the trail, in my own voice, at a conversational volume, something said, "Yeah." The kid looked past my shoulder. His face did a thing. I said, "Get in your truck." He got in his truck. I drove out ahead of him, and I did not stop for 11 miles. That was 11 years ago. I work at a mill now, on the green chain, which is a job for a young man, and I am not one, and my knees finally went the way I always knew they would. And I sit at a table with a scanner and a screen, and I do not talk to anybody for 8 hours, and nobody thinks that is strange because of the noise. Nash finished the season on Elk Mountain. He did 3 more after that, and then he took a job on a district in Idaho, and I got a Christmas card from him for a couple of years with a bird on it. He calls me sometimes. I have his number in the phone, and when it comes up, I look at it and I let it ring, and I know exactly how that reads, and I have made my peace with how it reads. Ambrose Teague died the following March. His daughter called the district office, and the district office called around, and I heard about it from a man at a gas station in October. He never went back up any mountain. I do not know what he saw or when he saw it. I know he told me the only true thing he had, and they kept me alive for 6 weeks. And if I had known one thing more than he did, I would have gone down that trail in July. Sharon retired. I got a card. I did not send one back, and I should have. I do not have a radio. I have a telephone, because you have to have one, and it sits on the counter. And there is a habit I have not been able to break in 11 years, and have stopped trying to break. When it rings, I pick it up and I hold it against my ear, and I do not say anything. I wait. Whoever it is says hello, and then they say hello again, and sometimes they hang up, and the ones who know me just start talking, and after a while I say something back. There is a woman at the mill who thinks it is a joke I do. She calls me, and when I pick up, she says, "I know you are there, Coop." Once a year, in the first week of August, at 9 at night, the phone rings. I pick it up. I do not say anything. The line is not quiet, exactly. It is the quality of quiet you get on a line that is open, that has a room on the other end of it, and if you stand very still in your kitchen with the lights off, you can hear a little wind in it, and something that could be a board with a spring in it. We wait each other out. It has never once spoken first in 11 years. Neither have I. The logbook is in a drawer in the kitchen under the dish towels. I took it down that mountain, and I never gave it back to the Forest Service, and nobody ever asked for it. I never say it out loud. I do not open it at all, most years. But I took it out that first October in a rented room in a town I had never been in, and I turned to the last page Carl Ostrander ever filled out, the 20th of August, 1968, 1600 weather in that small square hand. And the remarks column, in letters bigger than any letters on the page, something, did not answer. Under it, there was another line. It had not been there in July. I know the pages of that book the way I know the stairs of a house. It was dated the 9th of August. It was that year, my year, the day I walked down. It was in my own printing, in ink, neat, the way I print, with a little serif I put on the bottom of a capital A because a shop teacher made me do it once. One word, answered. The whistle came back with 4 blasts. I stood in the black with my hand still up and my own whistle still in my teeth, and I counted them again while they were happening, because that is what 19 years does to you. You do not think, you count. 1 blast is, "Where are you?" 2 blasts is, "Come to me." 3 blasts is, "I am hurt," or "I have found something, and you had better get here now." There is no 4. Nobody teaches 4. In 19 years of searches, in training weekends and mock scenarios and one bad night in a whiteout on Grissom Ridge, I had never heard anybody blow 4, because 4 is not a thing, the way there is no third day of the weekend. 4 blasts came out of the burn about 600 yards north of me, even spacing, the same pitch as a Fox 40, which is what we carry, which is what the county buys by the case and hands out at the start of every season. I took my whistle out of my mouth, and I did not blow it. Sonny was 40 yards to my left, working his side of the line, and he had stopped too, and I could see him through the standing dead with his head cocked over, and he had a hand up. He said, "Was that 4?" And that is the moment. That is where the whole rest of it starts, and if you want to know what I would give to go back and stand in that spot and put my hand over Sonny Greaves' mouth, the answer is everything I have got, because I said, yeah, that was 4. And 600 yards north, in a burned forest where nothing else in the world was talking, a voice that was mine said, yeah, that was 4. The Rhone Divide fire burned 61,000 acres over 11 days in the September of 2023. If you have never been in a big burn 2 years after, I do not know how to give it to you. Everybody thinks a burn is a black field. It is not. A stand replacing fire and lodgepole kills the trees and leaves them standing, and then for about 10 years they stand there dead and gray with the bark sloughing off, tens of thousands of them per square mile. All the same diameter, all the same height, all with no limbs below 30 feet, and there is nothing green above your knee. You can see 400 yards in every direction, and you cannot see anything because everything you can see is identical. Then they start coming down. Wind gets them, or the roots rot, and they go over into each other, and after a couple of years you have got blowdown in every direction, gray logs stacked in crosshatch 4 and 5 deep, and under that you have got fireweed and young lodgepole coming in so thick you cannot see your own boots. You do not walk in a burn. You climb over a burn. A mile takes 3 hours. You come out of it with your shins striped like a zebra and your forearms full of splinters and your feet wet because everything under those logs holds water. And it eats sound. That is the thing nobody knows unless they have worked one. All that standing dead and all that fireweed and all that broken country, the sound goes into it and does not come back the same. A man yelling 400 yards away sounds like a man yelling 400 yards away in a completely different direction than the one he is standing in. Search managers hate burns. There is a line in the state manual about it, something about how in areas of extensive standing dead, aural search techniques may produce unreliable results. I have read that sentence maybe 200 times since. My name is Marty Kubiak, and I run a track hoe for a paving outfit, and I have done that since I was 23 years old. I say that first because that is what I am. The other thing, the thing that took 19 years, that is not a job. Nobody pays you. You have a pager and a duffel in the back of the truck with a helmet and a headlamp and 2 liters of water and an emergency sack and a first aid kit and 100 feet of webbing, and about 11 times a year the pager goes off and you tell your foreman and you drive somewhere. 2 fingers on my left hand do not bend. The middle 2 at the big knuckle fused hard from a saw kick back in '99 when I was young and dumb, and it does not hurt, and I can still run a joystick, and it means I hold a whistle a certain way, pinched between the thumb and the flat of that dead hand. Everybody on the team knows my hand. Everybody on the team knew how I held the whistle. That is going to matter, and I want it in early. My wife is Deb. She was a hospital cook for 26 years, and she is retired, and she has opinions about my knees. When the pager goes off in the middle of the night, she does not wake up all the way. She rolls over and she says, "Take the other coat," and she is asleep again before I have got my boots on. 29 years. I got on the county team in 2006. There was a boy named Cody Farron who went missing out of a campground on the Upper Rhone on the 2nd of July that year. He was 9. He had gone down to the creek with a plastic cup to catch bugs, and by the time his mother stopped talking to her sister, he was not at the creek. They called out everybody. They called out the county team and the neighboring county and the guard and about 400 civilians, and I was one of the civilians. And I was 28 years old, and I had never done anything like it in my life. They put us on a line, shoulder to shoulder, arm's length, and they walked us up the drainage for 11 days. I want to tell you about the calling. They teach it now. There is a curriculum, but then it was just a man with a bullhorn saying, when you walk, you call his name, and you stop, and you count to 10, and you listen, and you call it again. 400 people. 11 days. Walking up a green drainage in the heat, saying the name of a 9-year-old boy over and over, and stopping and listening. Cody. And then everything in the world holding its breath. And then Cody. And then holding its breath again. You do that for 11 days, and it is in you forever. It goes into whatever part of a man works below the part that thinks. You do not decide to do it. It is a groove worn in the floor. We never found him. Not that year, not any year. Not a shoe, not a jacket, not a bone. 9-year-old boy, straight up gone, out of a campground with 40 people in it, and the last person to see him was a fisherman 200 yards downstream who said the boy had waved at him. I have thought about that fisherman at 3 in the morning more times than I will admit to, because he waved back. I never heard Cody Farron's voice. He was gone before I ever got there. He is a photograph in a case file, a school picture, red shirt, front tooth missing. Nobody alive who was not his mother knows what that boy sounded like. Keep that. I stayed on the team after. Most of the civilians did not. Most of them went home on the 11th day and got on with it, and I do not fault a single one of them. I signed up in October. I did the classes in a fire hall with folding chairs. I did land navigation, and I did tracking, and I did helicopter safety, and I did a class on crime scene preservation that made a man in the back row leave the room. I did it all in the winter of 2006, with my hands still smelling like diesel from the shop, and Deb sat at the kitchen table and quizzed me out of the book and never once asked me why. She asked me once, about 4 years in, at 2 in the morning, with the pager going. She said, "Do you think you are going to find him?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well," and she rolled over. She was right, whatever she meant by it. I have carried 100 and some searches since then. I have found 9 people alive, and I have carried 6 out under a tarp, and I have walked away from 11 more with nothing. And every single time I went in, there was a 9-year-old boy walking about a step and a half ahead of me in a red shirt. And every single time I called a stranger's name into the timber, part of my mouth was saying a different name. That is not a poetic way of putting it. I want it taken literally. There were nights I had to check myself. There were nights I opened my mouth to call for a lost hiker named Denise or Bill, and I had to stop and make sure of what was going to come out. You do not do that job for 19 years without leaving a door open. The Rhone Divide burn covers the upper Rhone drainage now. The campground is gone. It burned to the concrete pads. The call-out came on the 12th of September at 4:40 in the afternoon, which is a bad hour. It means you are starting your first operational period in the last 2 hours of daylight, and everybody knows it and nobody says it. Subject was Aaron Bick, 31, of Kalispell, an archery hunter, solo, 4 days overdue. His truck was at the Wolf Head trailhead with a note on the dash saying he was going up onto the divide and would be out Sunday. His wife had called it in Tuesday night after doing the thing that wives do, which is talk herself out of it for 36 hours. Pell ran the incident. Her name is Regina Pell, and she was a nurse and then a paramedic, and she has run search and rescue in that county for a long time, and she does not raise her voice, ever. And she is the best operations chief I have ever worked under, and she is the reason I am alive. She stood at the tailgate of the command rig with the map on it, and she said what she always says, which is, "Here is what we know, and here is what we are guessing, and I will tell you which is which." What we knew was a truck, a note, a wife, and the fact that Aaron Bick had told his brother he wanted to look at a wallow up in the head of Cotton Creek, which is deep in the burn. What we were guessing was everything else. She said, "The burn is 19,000 acres of blowdown. We are not going to grit it. We are going to run hasty teams up the drainages tonight and see if we can cut sign. And tomorrow, when the helicopter comes, we will do it right." She said, "Teams of 2. She said, "Sound sweeps." And then she said the thing she says at the end of every briefing in the same flat voice, and I have heard her say it maybe 100 times. She said, "Do not become a subject." Sonny Greaves and me had been a team for 12 years. He was 58. He drove a school bus in the winter and did nothing in the summer, and he had a bad hip and a worse knee and about a can and a half of Copenhagen a week, and he could go all night. He was one of those men who was out of shape in a way that does not slow him down. He would grunt and swear on every log, and he would be there at 4 in the morning, still going, still swearing. He talked constantly on a search. That is a thing about him. Most guys go quiet in the black. Sonny narrated. He would be 40 yards off your shoulder in the dark, and you would hear him saying, "Oh, that is a nice one. That is a beautiful log. I love that log. I want to take that log home and marry it." That noise was how you kept track of him. You did not need a light. You needed Sonny complaining. He had a way of calling the subject's name that I always thought was too casual for the work, and I told him so once, and he did not change it. He would say it like he was calling a guy in from a garage. "Hey, Aaron. Hey, Aaron, buddy." We went in at the Wolfhead trailhead at 6:10 in the evening, and we had 2 hours of light. The first mile is up an old road that the fire got but did not erase, and there is still tread under you, and we made time. Then the road quits at the old bridge site, and you drop into Cotton Creek, and you are in it. The light was going orange through all that standing gray, and it made the whole burn look like the inside of something. That is the only way I can put it. Ribs. Everywhere you looked, ribs, and a low red sun coming through them. We started the sound sweep at 7. Here is how it goes, and I want to be exact about it, because the exactness is the trap. You walk a line. Your partner walks a parallel line the distance out that visibility allows, which in that country is not far, 60 yards maybe. Every 100 yards or so, one of you calls. Then you both stop, dead still, boots planted, and you listen for a slow count of 30. Not 10, 30. Because a man with a broken pelvis under a logjam takes a while to get enough air to answer, and because everything the subject has left is going into that answer, and if you walk on at the count of 11, you have killed him. Then, if you hear anything at all, a shout or a groan or a rock knocked or a whistle, you stop everything and you locate. You turn toward it. You take a compass bearing on it. You call again. You listen. You walk toward the sound. That is the method. That is what the training teaches. Turn toward it and walk toward it and keep calling until you have got your hands on him. The whole discipline, everything I had been building in myself since I was 28 years old on a line of 400 people saying a dead boy's name, is one instruction. Go toward the voice. We swept up Cotton Creek for an hour and got nothing. Then the light went, and we put the headlamps on and kept going, because a subject who has been out 4 days does not care about your bedtime. At about 10 o'clock we came up out of the creek onto a bench, a big flat shelf of blowdown, maybe 400 acres, and the wind was dead, and Sonny called. He said, "Hey, Aaron. Hey, Aaron, buddy." We stopped. I got my 30 count, and at about the count of 22, off north, I heard a whistle. One blast. "Where are you?" Sonny said my name, and I said I heard it, and we both got our compasses out, and we got a bearing on it at 358 degrees, just west of north, and I got on the radio and I called it in to Pell. She said, "Copy, one blast, 358 from your last position." She said, "Keep me updated." And Sonny said, "Well," and I said, "Yeah," because it is not nothing to hear a whistle. Aaron Bick's family said he carried one. Half the hunters in that country carry one. But it is not everything either, because we had whistles too, and there were 4 other teams in that burn. Sonny put his in his mouth and blew one blast. "Where are you?" And out of the north, from what sounded like 400 yards, came one blast back, and then about 6 seconds later, another one blast, and then 6 seconds after that, another one. 3 single blasts, evenly spaced from the same place, which is not 3 blasts. 3 blasts is a burst. This was one, wait, one, wait, one. Sonny said, "That is not an emergency. That is a guy who does not know the code." I said, "Or that is a guy with a broken arm who can only get one out at a time." I want it understood that we said reasonable things to each other, standing on that bench at 10 at night with our lamps on, and everything we said was the right thing to say. And every conclusion we drew was the conclusion the training says to draw. We went north. It took us 50 minutes to make 400 yards, which is what a burn is. Every so often I stopped and blew one blast, and every time one blast came back, and every time it was still 400 yards north. Sonny said the thing you say. He said, Sound is doing something funny in here. And it was. It was true. It says so in the manual. That 50 minutes is the last ordinary time I ever had. I have gone back over it looking for the seam, the exact place where it stopped being a search and started being whatever it was, and there is no seam. It is all one piece. 2 men climbing over logs in the dark, working. We crossed maybe 11 big jackstraw piles in that 400 yards. On the third one, Sonny went in up to his hip between 2 logs, and I had to get down and get under his arm and lift. And he swore at me the whole time and told me he was going to write a letter to somebody about the quality of the timber. He said, "This is a badly managed forest." He said, "I want to speak to whoever burned this." That is the thing about him. He was funny in the worst places. He was funny at a recovery in 2019 where we brought a 19-year-old girl out of a slot canyon in 3 loads, and he made me laugh on the 3rd load, and I hated him for about a week, and then I understood. We stopped at the top of the 3rd pile to blow. Sonny sat on a log with his knee out straight and got his can out and put a pinch in and offered it to me, which he had done at least 1,000 times, and I said no, which I had said at least 1,000 times. He looked out at the standing dead in the dark, all those pale trunks going away in the lamp beam like a hallway with no walls. He said, "You know what this reminds me of?" I said, "What?" He said, "The Upper Rhone. Before..." And I did not say anything, because I knew what he was doing. He had been my partner for 12 years, and he knew what year I got on the team, and he knew the name of the boy, and he had never once said it to me. And every September, when the anniversary came around, and I got quiet in the truck, he talked about football. He said, "It burned right through the campground. Did you know that? Took the pads." I said, "I know." He said, "They never did find that kid." And I said, "No." And he spat, and he stood up, and his knee popped, and he said, "All right," and we went on. That is the last real conversation I had with Sonny Greaves. I have thought about the fact that we said the boys' drainage out loud, standing in the middle of it, at 11 at night, 400 yards from a whistle that was not a whistle. I do not think it needed us to say it. I think it had been standing at the edge of my light since the trailhead, listening to a man carry a 9-year-old boy around in his chest for 19 years, and I think it can hear that. We got off the last pile at about 11:15, and I blew one blast. Nothing came back. We stood there in a silence that had teeth in it, and Sonny said, "Huh," and I blew one blast again, and nothing came back. And then, from the south, from behind us, from the ground, we had just spent 50 minutes crossing one blast. Same pitch, same distance, 400 yards. I want to say what that does to a man's inner ear. We had been walking toward that whistle for 50 minutes into the north, and now the whistle was 400 yards south of us, and there was no possible route it could have taken to get there without crossing directly through the 2 of us. Sonny put his light on the ground between his boots, and he looked at it. He said, "It went around." And I said, "Yeah," and I put it in the same box I had put the tracks in, the box where you keep the things that are going to make sense in the morning. It is a big box. I filled it up that night. At about 11:30, we came up on a hard edge in the burn where the fire had laid down, and there was a strip of green timber, maybe 100 yards wide, running along a seep, unburned, an island. The manual has a word for that too. It calls it a fire refuge. Sonny went in first, and I will say that the second we stepped out of the standing dead and under green trees, both of us went quiet, and it was not a decision. Under those trees, the sound came back. Our boots came back. My jacket sleeve on a branch came back. After 4 hours in a place that swallowed everything, being able to hear yourself was like coming up out of water. There was a game trail through the seep, and Sonny put his light on it, and there were tracks in the black mud. Boot tracks, a lug sole, size 11 or so, worn on the outside heel. They came up the trail toward us, and went past us back into the burn, and there was a set going the other way too, on top of them, so somebody had walked in and walked out. Sonny crouched down. He was better on sign than I was. He said, "Huh." I said, "What?" He said, "They are the same track. In and out, same boot." I said, "So he came in and went back out, so what?" Sonny put his light on the ones going out, and then on the ones coming in, and he sat back on his heels. He said, "No, Marty. The out ones are on top of the in ones. All of them. The whole length of the trail. That is what you would expect. But look at how the mud sits." And he showed me, and I looked, and it took me a while. When you walk, your heel bites first, and your toe pushes off, and the toe throws a little wall of mud back behind you. Every track is a small machine, and the machine tells you which way the man went. The mud goes the opposite direction from the man. The set pointed north had thrown its mud south. That is a man walking north. That is what a track is supposed to look like. The set pointed south had thrown its mud south too. I stood over it a long while, trying to make it be anything else. A man walking south throws his mud north. There is no other way for it to happen, unless the toes are pointed south, and the man is not. Both sets of tracks on that trail were laid down by something moving north. One of them was walking, the other one had its feet on backward, and it was moving north anyway. I said, "That is a bad casting. That is mud settling." Sonny said, "Sure." He stood up, his knee popped the way it always did, and he said something to the knee, which was a thing he did. And we had been under those live trees for about 6 minutes, in the only place in 19,000 acres where sound behaved itself. And out in the burn 400 yards north a whistle blew. 4 blasts. That is where you came in. That is the top of it. I said, "Yeah, that was 4. And my own voice said it back to me out of the black. What happened in me happened in about a second and a half. I did not think it is a monster. I did not think anything about the woods. I have been in the woods my whole life, and I have never once been afraid of them. I thought somebody is playing back a recording. That was it. That was the whole of my mind. Some idiot with a phone, some kid with a speaker, and my brain went straight to it, and there was even a little kick of anger in it, because you get that on searches. You get people. In 2014, a man drove a 4-wheeler into a search area to see if he could help, and we spent an hour finding him. Sonny said, "That is somebody screwing with us." I said, "Yeah." And out of the burn, 400 yards north, in Sonny's voice, with the little wet click he had in the back of his throat from the Copenhagen, "That is somebody screwing with us." Sonny stood in the green under those trees with his headlamp pointed at nothing, and I watched every bit of color go out of a man I had known for 12 years. He reached over. He put his hand on my sleeve. He is not a man who touches people. He said, "Real quiet, Marty. I did not say that." And I said, "I know. I heard you not say it, because I had watched him." His mouth had not moved. Sonny got on the radio. He said, "Base. Team 3. Pell came back right away. Base." Sonny said, "Base. We have got somebody in our area who is not one of ours." He said, "We are on the green strip on the north side of the Cotton Creek bench, and we are hearing whistles and voices to the north, and it is not right." There was a pause, and then Pell said, "Team 3, say again the last." Sonny looked at me. He said, "Base, we are hearing our own voices played back to us." The radio said nothing for 11 or 12 seconds, long enough that I was already ashamed for him, standing there, the way you are ashamed for a guy who tells the truth on an open channel. And then Pell said, in exactly the voice she uses to tell you a subject is deceased, in the flattest voice a human being has ever used on a radio, "Team 3, base. Give me your coordinates and stand by." And then she said, "Do not move toward it." Sonny said, "Say again, base." And she said, "Team 3, do not move toward the sound. Give me your coordinates." Now this is the part that gets me. This is the part that has kept me up for 2 years. Regina Pell did not ask us a single question. She did not say, "What do you mean?" She did not say, "Are you sure?" She did not say, "Has anybody got a speaker out there?" She did not laugh, and Pell will laugh at you. She is not a gentle person about foolishness. She said, "Do not move toward the sound," like she was reading it off a card. Sonny read her our coordinates off the unit. And out in the burn, 400 yards north, a voice that was Sonny's gave the same coordinates back, in the same order, at the same speed, and got one number wrong, the last one. He said 4-1, it said 4-2. 100 feet. It moved us 100 feet. Sonny's hand came up and he pushed his headlamp back on his forehead and he stood there and he laughed. It came out of him like a hiccup. He said, "Marty, why would it do that? Why would it change the number?" And I did not know, and I still do not, and it is the single most frightening thing that happened to me in the burn, worse than what came later, because everything else that thing did was copying, and that was not copying. That was editing. Pell came back on and she said, "Team 3, hold position. Do not use the radio for anything but emergency, and stand by for extraction at first light." Sonny keyed up and said, "Base, we still have a subject out here." And Pell said, "Hold position." And Sonny, who had been on that team for 20 years, who had never once in his life argued with an ops chief on an open channel, said, "Reggie, there is a man out here." Silence. Then Pell said, "Team 3, hold position," and there was something in the way she said it, and I did not know what it was at the time, and I know now. She was scared, and she was scared of something she was not allowed to put on the radio, and she was scared for us in a way that had nothing to do with hypothermia. We held position for about 40 minutes. We sat with our backs against a green spruce, in the middle of that green strip with our lights off, because the lights felt like a hand raised in a crowd, and we did not talk, and Sonny did not narrate. And I have never in 12 years spent 40 silent minutes with that man. The burn did not do anything. There was no wind. There were no whistles. At about 10 past 12, I started thinking the thing everybody thinks. I started thinking about the speaker again, and the kid, and the four-wheeler, and I started building it back up, brick by brick, because a man cannot sit in the dark for 40 minutes without either building something or coming apart. I said, "Quiet," out of the side of my mouth. "I bet there is a guy with a parabolic microphone and a speaker." Sonny did not say anything. I said, "Sonny." And Sonny said, from about 10 feet to my left, from a spot where nobody was sitting, out in the fireweed, "Yeah, I have gone over this. I have gone over it every night for 2 years." Sonny Greaves was sitting against the tree on my right side. His shoulder was against my shoulder. I could feel his shoulder. I could smell the Copenhagen. When that voice came out of the fireweed on my left, I felt his whole body go rigid against mine, and I heard him stop breathing. We were not fooled. Neither of us was fooled, not for 1 second. And I still turned my head. I turned my head to the left, toward it, fast, all the way you do when somebody says your name. That is all I did. I did not speak. I did not stand up. I did not move a boot. I turned my head about 80 degrees in the dark with my light off, and there was nothing to see, because there was nothing to see with. And the thing in the fireweed, 10 feet away, went quiet, all the way quiet. The kind of quiet where you understand that something has gotten what it came for and is thinking about it. I did not understand what I had done. I did not understand it for another 11 hours. I sat there with my heart going, and I thought I had beat it. I had not said a word. I turned my head. At about 1 in the morning, it started calling for Aaron. That is the part where I nearly lost my mind, and I will lay it out plain, because it was clever in a way that I still do not have a word for. It did not call in a monster voice. It called in my voice. It called exactly the way I call, which is by the book, because I have called by the book for 19 years. Aaron Bick. This is County Search and Rescue. If you can hear my voice, make any sound you can, then a 30 count, then again 100 yards further off. Aaron Bick. This is County Search and Rescue. And it worked its way north across that burn, calling, stopping, calling, the way a searcher does. And it was doing it right. The spacing was right. The count was right. It had watched me do it for 6 hours, and it had learned the job. And Sonny leaned over and put his mouth an inch from my ear, and he said, on almost no air at all, "If Bick is alive out there, he is going to answer that. I have wondered whether Aaron Bick was ever alive. I have thought about whether there was ever a wife, a truck, a note on a dash. There was. I have seen the truck. I have met the wife. Aaron Bick was a real man who went hunting. But I have also thought about the fact that the whole reason two men were standing in the middle of 19,000 acres of blowdown at 1 a.m. shouting a stranger's name into the dark was that somebody, somewhere, had gone missing. And that a thing that eats answers would have to start by making somebody go missing. I do not know. That is honest. I do not know, and Pell does not know. And the sheriff's office has a file with a red tab on it, and inside the red tab is a piece of paper that says the case is open. At about 2 a.m, Sonny said he was going out to the edge of the green to look. I said no. He said, I am not going into the black. I am going to the edge, and I am going to sit and look with the binoculars and see if there is a light out there, because if there is a guy out there with a speaker, then that guy has got a light. And if I see a light, then this is a person, and I am going to feel a whole lot better. And I want to be fair to him. That was good thinking. That was the right thing. Under any other circumstance in the world, that was what a competent searcher does. He went about 60 yards. I could see the shape of him against the gray where the green timber ended and the standing dead started. He sat down on a log and he put the glasses up. He sat there for maybe 10 minutes, and then he stood up. I saw him stand up, and I saw him take the glasses down, and I saw him hold very still. And then, from out in the burn, 100 yards past him, a child said, "Are you Marty?" It was a boy's voice. 9, maybe. Not scared, not crying. A question asked politely, in the dark, from a place where no child was, in a burn where nothing had lived for 2 years. "Are you Marty?" I have never heard Cody Farron's voice. I have said that. Nobody I know has ever heard Cody Farron's voice. And every hair on my body stood up, because I recognized it. I do not know how to explain that, and I have quit trying. I knew. It was the same way you know a smell from when you were 4 years old. It was the voice that had been in my head for 19 years. Under everything, the voice I made up for a school picture with a missing tooth, and it was out in that burn asking for me by name. Sonny turned around and looked back at me across 60 yards of dark. I could not see his face. And then he did the thing that ended him, and it was not stupid, and it was not brave, and I will not let anybody call it either one. He faced the burn, and he cupped his hands, and he called out to a 9-year-old boy, the way he had called out to a 9-year-old boy every summer of his adult life, the way any decent man alive would have. He said, "Hey, buddy, hey, stay right there." I was up and running before he finished the sentence. 60 yards of blowdown at night with a headlamp bouncing. I made it maybe 20. I went down twice, hard, and the second time I put my chin on a log and split it, and I did not know that until the hospital. When I got my light up, he was gone. Not walked off, gone. He had been standing on a down log at the edge of the green with his hands still up around his mouth, and now the log was there and he was not, and there was nothing to hear. No brush. No crashing. Sonny Greaves weighed 230 pounds and had a bad knee and could not cross 10 feet of blowdown without a sound like a man dropping firewood down a staircase. I stood on his log and I put my light out into the black, and there was nothing but standing dead going away in rows, gray, 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 and past that the dark. I did not call his name. I want you to understand what it cost. I was standing on the log where my friend of 12 years had been standing 10 seconds before, and there is one word, one, that had been in the front of my mouth my whole adult life, and it was in there now with its hand on the door, and I stood on that log with my jaw locked and my eyes going, and I did not say it, because I had been standing right there when the burn learned Sonny's voice, and I could not stand the thought of what it would do with mine saying his name. The radio on my chest strap said, in Pell's voice, at full volume, "Team 3, base, Marty." What was that? I looked down at it. The little red light on the front, the one that comes on when a signal is coming in, was not lit. I turned the radio off. I turned it off, and I opened the back and I took the battery out, and I put the battery in my pants pocket and the radio in my jacket, and I did all of that standing on a log in the dark with my hands shaking so bad I dropped the screw and never found it. Then I got down off the log with my light off, and I sat in the fireweed, and I put my back against the spruce and I waited for morning. It came and stood over me twice. I am going to tell it flat because that is the only way I can. The first time was maybe 3 a.m. I had my eyes shut, which is a thing you learn, because with your eyes shut in the dark, you stop trying to see and you start hearing what is actually there. And I heard it come through the green strip, and it came through that green timber the way a person comes through green timber, snagging, ducking, stepping on things. It walked up to about 6 feet from me and stopped. It stood there, and it breathed. And the breathing was wrong in a way I did not work out until later, when I was in a hospital bed with a light on. And it is this. It breathed in through the mouth and out through the mouth, in a 2-count and out a 2-count, perfectly regular, like a man doing an exercise out of a book. It did not have a body that needed the air. It had watched bodies use air. Then it said, in Sonny's voice, in a normal conversational tone, from 6 feet away, "Marty, my knee is out. I cannot get up." And I sat with my eyes shut and I did not answer. It waited. It waited a very long time. It was not in any hurry at all. Then it said, in Sonny's voice, "I know you can hear me." And then it said, in Sonny's voice, and this is the one that got in, "Hey, hey, it is me. Look at me. Look at me." And that is when I understood the first half of it. Not all of it, the first half. It did not want a word. It wanted me to turn my head. The second time was around 4:30, and it brought the boy. It stood off in the black timber, and it went back and forth. It did Sonny for a while, and I lay there in the fireweed with my eyes shut and my hands over my ears, which does not work as well as you would think. And then it did the boy. "Are you Marty? Are you Marty? I am at the creek. I am at the creek, and I cannot find the road." I am not going to write out the rest of what it said in that child's voice at 4:30 in the morning on the 12th of September. It went on for close to an hour. Some of it was about the water. Some of it was about being tired. None of it was for anybody but me. It had gone and looked in the deepest drawer I had, and it had not found it by rummaging. I had left it out on the table. 19 years of it. Every time I stepped out of a truck at a trailhead, I brought that boy with me, and I brought him into that burn, and I set him down. There is a thing about lying in the dark and being certain, all the way to the bottom, that a voice is not what it says it is. Certainty does nothing. Certainty is a room in the front of the house, and the voice does not knock on that door. It comes in through the floor. My chest was doing something on its own. My legs were tense to stand up. I had my eyes shut and my hands over my ears, and I was crying, and every single system in me under the neck was already answering, was already up and walking toward a creek to help a boy, and the only thing holding the whole thing together was 2 fingers on a left hand that do not bend, dug into the dirt. I dug a hole in the ground with a hand I cannot make a fist with. When it went gray, I was still there. The light came into the burn the way it does, no dawn to speak of, just the gray getting less, everything at once. 10,000 dead trees. I sat up, and my whole body hurt, and my chin was stuck to my collar with dried blood, and my hands were black. And I did the thing that a search and rescue man does, which is that I took stock. Water, about a liter. Food, 2 bars. Compass, yes. Map, yes. Radio, no battery in it, and I was not going to put one in. Global positioning unit, on Sonny. Sonny. Gone. And out in the burn, in the gray light, a whistle blew 4 times. I did not look up. I want to say that I had figured it all out by then. I had not. What I had was a piece of it, from 3 a.m, from 6 feet away. Look at me. I had spent the whole night thinking that not answering meant not talking. That is what everybody thinks. That is the rule you would come up with. And it is the rule that a man like Ambrose Teague hands down, and it is not wrong. It is just not the whole thing, and being only half right in that country will kill you. An answer is not a word. An answer is the thing a voice is asking for. When somebody calls your name across a parking lot, they are not asking for a word. They are asking you to turn around. The word is just how you confirm that you did. And every single time that thing had made a noise in the burn, I had done what 19 years of training had built into me, which is exactly what it wanted, which is that I had turned toward the sound and taken a bearing on it and made it the center of my attention. Sonny answered with his mouth, and it took him. I had answered with my head 20 times in one night, and it had been standing there patiently collecting each one, and the only reason I was still sitting in that fireweed was that I had not yet given it the last thing, which is my feet. I sat there in the gray and I put it together like a man reading a bad x-ray of his own chest. It calls. You turn. Turning is a small yes. Enough small yeses and you are already walking. And you never once said a word, and you go into the black anyway, and afterward, if there is an afterward, you tell yourself you never answered it. I got up. There is a compass in the lid pocket of my pack, a Silva mirrored sighting compass, and I have had it since 2007. The Wolfhead trailhead was southwest of me. I had a map, and I had a pretty good idea where I was, within a quarter mile, which is as good as anybody gets in a burn. I did the declination in my head, and I set the bezel on 199 degrees. Then I sat back down on a log, and I made myself do the hardest arithmetic of my life, which was to decide, sitting still, before I took one step, exactly what I was and was not going to do for the next 10 hours. Because I knew that once I was moving, I would not be able to decide anything. I would only be able to do what I had already decided. I decided this. I would walk 199 degrees. I would sight the compass on a dead tree at the limit of visibility, and I would walk to that tree, and at that tree I would sight another one, and I would walk to that one. I would not raise my head from the compass and the next tree. If a sound came from any direction other than dead ahead on my bearing, I would not turn toward it. I would not turn my eyes toward it. I would not stop walking. I would not slow down. I would not hold my breath to hear it better. I would not use the whistle. I would not use the radio. I would not speak. And I would not stop for anything I saw that was not a tree on my bearing. Anything. I said that last one to myself, out loud, one time, quiet, sitting on that log, and then I did not say anything else out loud for 10 hours and 40 minutes. I have run a track hoe for 24 years. There is a thing that happens when you are trenching, when you get in a rhythm and your hands are doing it, and the top of your mind goes somewhere else and comes back an hour later, and there is 400 feet of trench behind you. That is what I did. That is the only skill I brought out of that burn. Sight the tree, walk to the tree. Sight the tree, walk to the tree. It came with me at about the first 200 yards. It did not try to be subtle. It was in the standing dead off my right shoulder, and it kept pace, and it did not care that I knew. It said, in Sonny's voice, "Marty, my knee. Marty, Marty, come on now. Sight the tree. Walk to the tree." It said, in Sonny's voice, "You son of a bitch, Marty, look at me. Sight the tree." At about an hour in, it stopped doing Sonny, and it did Pell, and it did her well. It had her exact flatness. And it said, "Team 3 base, we have got a location on Sonny. He is a quarter mile east of you, and he is alive." East. I put my eyes on the compass needle, and I watched it sit on 199 degrees, and I walked to the next tree. It said, "Team 3, this is base. Marty, we have him. He is alive. He is asking for you." I have been asked since how I stood that. People say it like it is a compliment. They say, "I do not know how you did that." Here is how. 20 times that morning I understood that Sonny was probably lying somewhere in that burn with a broken leg, and that the thing following me had been listening to him scream for 6 hours and had all of it, and that if he was alive, walking east was the way to make sure both of us died out there, and if he was dead, walking east was the way to make it too. That is not strength. That is arithmetic. Any man can do arithmetic. And every single time it said his name, I felt my head start to come around, the muscles in the side of my neck engaging on their own, and I put my chin down against my collarbone and I looked at the needle. At around noon it changed. It quit trying to move me and it started trying to make me look. That is a different thing, and it is worse. It got out ahead of me. It got on my bearing, and it started leaving things. At the base of a dead lodgepole, about 120 yards ahead, sitting upright on a root, there was a whistle. Orange. A Fox 40 county issue. I walked past it at a distance of about 11 feet, and I did not turn my head, and I saw it anyway in the outside of my eye, and I have never worked so hard at anything as I worked at not looking down at that whistle to see whether the lanyard was Sonny's, whether it had the length of paracord on it he braided himself in the winter. Because Sonny braided his own lanyards, and everyone was different. Sight the tree. Walk to the tree. 20 minutes later, there was a boot. 20 minutes after that, there was a hunting pack, a good one, high-end, a color you do not see in a burn, propped against a log, and I have thought since that it was Aaron Bick's, and I do not know, and I did not look. And at about 2 in the afternoon, standing directly on my bearing, about 80 yards out, at the exact spot where my compass wanted me to sight my next tree, there was a man. He had his back to me. He was standing in the middle of the blowdown in a green rain shell, with the hood down. He had gray hair, cut the way an old man cuts it. He was not moving. He was standing there with his hands at his sides, on my bearing, waiting. And I am not going to tell you I was calm. I stopped walking. I stood there about 90 seconds, and my legs were going, and there was a sound in my ears like a shop vac. Then I picked a tree 12 degrees off my bearing, a dead lodgepole with a lightning scar, and I walked to it, and at that tree I reset the bezel, and I walked 199 degrees again, and I never looked back to see whether the man in the green shell had turned around. It cost me maybe 200 yards. It cost me nothing else. He was not there. I know that. If he was there, he was Sonny, or he was Aaron Bick, or he was a searcher off one of the other teams standing in the blowdown at 2 in the afternoon with his hands at his sides and his back to me, not moving, in a place where a man cannot stand still for 90 seconds without swatting a fly. I know it, and I want to tell you what 19 years of doing this work leaves in a man, which is this. I have thought about that man every day for 2 years, and I am not sure. And that is what the thing wanted. That is the last thing it did to me, and it is the only one that stuck. It went with me the whole rest of the way. The last 4 hours it did not use anybody's voice at all. It just walked 30 yards off my right shoulder, over blowdown I had to climb at the pace of a man on a sidewalk. At about 3:30, it started doing something I could not put a name on for the longest while. It made a small sound every 15 or 20 seconds. A tap, a knock, a stick against a log. And I understood after a while that it was doing the 30 count. Tap, and then a long space, and then tap. It had learned the sound sweep. It was running one on me. At 4:20 in the afternoon, I came out of the standing dead onto the old road above the bridge site, and my legs went out, and I sat down in the middle of the road. There were tire tracks in the dust, fresh ones, a four-wheeler. I got up and I walked down the road with my eyes on the ruts, and it followed me to the edge of the black, and then it did not come any further, and I felt it not come, the way you feel a dog quit at the end of its chain. I came around the last bend, and there were 3 rigs, and a command trailer, and 11 people, and a helicopter sitting in the meadow with its blades tied down. Somebody yelled my name. I did not turn around. I could not do it. I kept walking down the middle of that road toward the trucks, with my eyes on the ruts, and somebody yelled it again, and then they were running, and a woman got in front of me and put both hands flat on my chest, and I stopped. It was Pell. She looked at my face for about 4 seconds, and she did not ask me anything. She turned around, and she said, over her shoulder, to 11 people standing in a meadow in the afternoon sun with radios on their chests. Nobody says his name. They found Sonny Greaves on the 18th of September, 6 days later, 22 miles east-northeast, in a drainage on the other side of the divide, in country he had no business being in, and could not have walked to in 6 days on a bad knee with no food. He was alive. He was lying in a creek bed with his boots off, hypothermic, dehydrated, 40 pounds of him gone, and both of his hands were cut to pieces in a way the doctor could not account for. He does not remember the burn. He remembers the tailgate briefing. He remembers Pell saying, "Do not become a subject." He remembers the first mile of the old road, and he remembers a log he liked, and after that there is nothing until a helicopter. They ask him about the 6 days, and he gets a look. It is not a frightened look. It is the look a man gets when he is asked about a movie he half-watched. There was an extraction team. I did not know that until the after-action review in November, in a fire hall with folding chairs, sitting in the back with a paper cup. At 2:40 in the morning on the 12th of September, after Pell lost radio contact with Team 3, she put 4 people at the Wolfhead trailhead and sent them up Cotton Creek with lights. They walked for 6 hours and 20 minutes. They kept a good log. They wrote down their turns, and they took bearings, and one of them was a Marine, and he was counting paces. At 9 in the morning they came down out of the burn and out onto an old road at a bridge site, and it was the same bridge site they had left from, and none of them could tell you when they turned around. And the pace count said 11 miles. Nobody in that fire hall said one word about it. Pell read the paragraph out loud and turned the page. The sheriff's office never found Aaron Bick. They ran that burn for 11 more days, with 140 people, and 2 dogs, and a helicopter with a heat camera, and the dogs would not work it. That is in the after-action report, in a paragraph nobody talks about. Both dogs alerted, repeatedly, on areas the handlers then cleared and found nothing, and by the 4th day neither dog would leave the road. The report says the results were consistent with scent pooling in complex terrain. Regina Pell retired that winter. She is 59 years old. I asked her once, at a barbecue, standing by a cooler with a beer I did not want, why she said what she said on the radio that night, why she said do not move toward the sound before she had one single fact. She looked at the cooler for a long time. She said, my dad worked a fire lookout when I was a kid. And that was all she said, and she went and talked to somebody else, and I did not follow her, and I have never asked her again, and I never will. 2 years. I still have the pager. It is in the drawer with the batteries and the tape measures, and I have never once turned it off, and about 11 times a year it goes off in the middle of the night. Deb rolls over and says, "Take the other coat." I get up, I put my boots on, I get in the truck, and I drive to whatever trailhead it is, and I park at the back of the line of rigs, and I sit in the cab with the engine off and the window down, and I listen to them do the briefing. And when the teams go up the trail, I sit in that truck until they come back out. Every time. 2 years. Nobody on that team has ever said one word to me about it. They walk past my window and they touch the hood. What I lost is not what people think. I did not lose my nerve. I would go into that burn tomorrow. I lost the answer. That is the only way I can say it. Somebody calls my name in a store and my head does not come around. Deb learned it inside of a month. She does not call me from the other room anymore. She comes and she stands where I can see her and she touches my elbow. The doctors have a word for it. They ran a hearing test and my hearing is fine. I went to see Sonny in the hospital the day they flew him out. He was asleep. They had him under about 4 blankets. And there was a nurse in there doing something with a bag, and I stood in the doorway with my hat in my hand, and I did not go in, and I did not say his name, and I was not going to. And the nurse looked at me like she was going to ask if I was family, and then she looked at my face and she did not. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes, and Sonny Greaves, asleep, with his cracked lips and his hands wrapped in white to the wrist, turned his head on the pillow toward the door, toward me, with his eyes shut. And he said, "Yeah, Marty," he said, "coming." Every phone on the mountain rang at once at 2:10 in the morning. There are 5 of them. There is one in the base office, one in the maintenance shop, one in the shack at the bottom of the sister chair, one in the shack at the top, and one in the warming hut on the summit that everybody has always called the nest. They are federal handsets from 1968, black steel boxes bolted to the wall with a crank on the side, and they are not telephones. They do not connect to the world. They connect to each other on a single pair of copper that somebody strung up the lift line before I was born, and the only way one of them rings is if somebody standing at another one of them turns the crank. I was asleep in the room over the shop. The shop phone is on the wall at the bottom of the stairs, 11 feet from my head, with a floor in between. They rang for 11 seconds. I know that because I was awake for all of it and I was counting, the way you count when you have got nothing else to hold on to, not one after the other. All 5, and I could hear the far ones through the open window, thin, coming down off the mountain out of the dark, the sister top shack and the nest ringing away up there in the cold air. 1 line, 5 stations. Crank any one of them and the other 4 ring. That is how they are wired. Anybody who has worked a ski hill knows it. So that was not the thing. The thing was the code. You do not just crank the phone. Every station has a ring code, and it is printed on a yellowed card thumbtacked next to each handset in a hand nobody living can identify. Base office is 1 long. Shop is 2 short. Sister bottom is 1 long, 1 short. Sister top is 3 short. The nest is 1 long, 2 short. Somebody, somewhere on that mountain, at 2:10 in the morning, in a resort that had been closed since the 12th of April and had exactly 1 human being on it, cranked out 4 long rings. 4 long? There is no 4 long. It is not on the card. I lay in that bed on my back, and I did not go down the stairs. Cold Sister Basin is a ski area at the head of the Chandler Drainage, 21 miles up a county road that the county gave up on maintaining sometime in the 90s. 3 lifts, a day lodge with a cafeteria that has not made money since the Carter administration. 22 employee cabins built out of surplus lumber in 1954. A maintenance shop, a pump house, a snowcat barn, a septic field, and 61 buildings altogether if you count the outhouses, which the insurance company does. It is open from Thanksgiving to the 2nd week of April. In a good year there are 90 people working there. In a bad year there are 40, and the owner does not take a paycheck. The rest of the year there is 1 person. The job is called summer caretaker. It is posted every March on a corkboard in a grocery store in Chandler and on one website nobody reads, and it pays badly, and it comes with the room over the shop and all the propane you can burn. I want to lay out what the work actually is, because I have noticed that people hear caretaker and they picture a man sitting on a porch. You run the well pump twice a week so the pipes do not go stagnant. You walk the lift lines, all 3 of them, every week, top to bottom, on foot, which is 9 miles of steep grass and rock, and you look at every tower for a cracked weld or a bird nest in the wheel train, and you grease what needs grease, and you write down what does not. You mow 2 acres of it around the lodge and the cabins with a machine that hates you. You pull the plywood off the windows in June and you put it back in September. You chase out the marmots, and they are always in the ceiling of cabin 14, and it is always cabin 14, and nobody has ever known why. You inspect the fire extinguishers. You run the diesel generator an hour a month. You paint. There is always something to paint at a ski area, and the summer is exactly long enough to paint about 1/3 of what needs it, which is how you know the job is honest. And on Tuesdays at 10 in the morning, you go into the base office and you answer the phone. That is a real phone, the only one, a copper line that comes up the road on poles from Chandler, and it goes out about 4 times a summer when a tree comes down on it. June Sackett owns Cold Sister. She has owned it since her father died. She calls at 10 on Tuesday and you tell her what broke, and she tells you what she can and cannot afford to fix, and it takes about 11 minutes, and then you have got another week. That is the job. It is a good job for a certain kind of man. I took it because it was 21 miles from a town of 900 people, and because the ad said no cell service, and because at that particular point in my life I had come to the conclusion that I needed to be somewhere where a telephone could not find me, and that if I sat still in a place like that for 4 months I might get somewhere with the thing I had been carrying. That is the honest reason, and I am going to say the rest of it in a minute. I got there on the 9th of June. I drove up the county road in a truck loaded with 4 months of groceries, and I let myself into the day lodge with a key June had mailed me. And I stood in the main room in the dark with the plywood still on the windows and the chairs upside down on the tables. I put my light on the wall behind the bar where they hang the old photographs. There are about 30 of them. Ski school classes, race teams, a man in 1956 standing next to a snowcat that looks like a tank, the crew that built the sister chair, and there is one with white letters printed along the bottom, Cold Sister Ski School, 1989, and 3 rows of kids in one-piece suits squinting into the sun. 3rd row, 4th from the left, is my brother, Daniel Pryor. He was 14. He has his goggles up on his forehead and his mouth is open because he is saying something to the kid next to him, which is what he was doing in every photograph ever taken of him. I stood in that dark room for a while. I had not known. I want that clear. I did not go looking for the place. Cold Sister was a name on a corkboard. Our folks took us up here twice, 3 times maybe, the winters we lived in Chandler before the divorce, and I was 9 and I remembered nothing. And Danny had come back on his own the winter he was 14 and taught little kids to snowplow, and I had known that the way you know a fact about somebody, which is not at all. I put my light on his face until my arm got tired. Then I went and got the plywood pry bar out of the truck and I started on the windows, because it was 3 in the afternoon and there was work. Danny was 4 years older. He was the one everybody liked. That is not a thing I say bitterly, and I have had a long time to check. He was funny, and he was easy, and he had the kind of face that made strangers tell him things, and by the time he was 22, he had a problem, and by the time he was 30, he had the problem instead of a life. I am not going to do the whole thing. There is a version of this that is a story about my brother, and it is not the story I am telling, and it is not any of anybody's business. What matters is the shape of the last 11 years. He called me. That was the shape of it. For 15 years, Danny called me, and it was always at night, and it was always collect or from a number I did not know, and he was always somewhere. He was in Elko, he was in Susanville, he was in a hospital in Boise, and then he was not in the hospital anymore, and he needed $140. And I always answered, every single time. I had a phone by the bed for that purpose, and Renee, who was my wife for 6 of those years, and is a good person, used to lie there with the pillow over her head while I sat on the edge of the bed at 2 in the morning saying, okay, Danny, where are you? Where are you? I drove to Elko, I drove to Susanville, I drove to a Chevron in Winnemucca at 4 in the morning and he was not there, and I sat in that lot until 8 and then I drove home. I did that for 15 years, and I am not telling it to make myself a saint about it, because there is a thing that happens to you when you spend 15 years going toward a voice, and the thing is that you start to hate the voice, and then you hate yourself for hating it, and the two of them twist around each other until you cannot tell one from the other, and one night the phone rings and something in your chest goes flat and cold before you have even picked it up. The last call was the 11th of March, 11 years ago, 2 in the morning, a payphone. He said, Emmett, he said, hey, it is me. I am at a Sinclair station. And I sat on the edge of that bed and I looked at the floor. And I said, Danny, I cannot. That is what I said, those 3 words. I did not yell at him. I did not tell him anything true. I did not say I love you, and I cannot do this anymore, which was the whole of it, and which he would have understood, because he was not stupid. He was the smartest one of the 2 of us. And I said, Danny, I cannot. And he was quiet, and then he said, okay, and it was the gentlest thing I have ever heard, and I hung up the phone. I hung up first. That is the part. He said, okay, and I put the phone down while he was still on the line, and I lay back down in the dark, and my heart was going like I had run somewhere. Nobody has seen my brother since. He is not dead as far as anybody can prove. He is on a list somewhere in the state of Nevada. Every year or 2, some clerk sends a form. He was 51 years old this June, and he does not have a grave, and there is no place to go and put anything down. And I have gone 11 years without one single day where I did not run those 3 words back and look for the seam in them where I could have gotten another sentence in. That is what I brought up the county road to Cold Sister Basin on the 9th of June. The first thing that happened I did not even count as a thing. The second week I was up there, I went up the Sister Chair line on foot to do the tower walk, which takes the better part of a day. 16 towers, up the fall line through a cut in the timber, and the chairs hang there all summer, 68 of them, because it is cheaper to leave them on than to pull them off and store them. They hang dead still. There is not much wind in that basin in the morning. At Tower 9 I came around into the lift line, and one chair, one out of 68, was swinging front to back, about a foot of travel, the way a chair swings when somebody has just gotten off it. I stood there, and I watched it slow down and stop, which took about 2 minutes. And I looked around at the other 67 chairs hanging in the sun like nothing, and I thought about a raven landing on it, and I put it away. The chair at Tower 9 is not something I even remembered until August. The bull wheel was the second one, and it was the last thing that happened where I still had a place to put it. The bottom terminal of the Sister has a bull wheel about 11 feet across that the haul rope runs around, and it turns on a bearing the size of a dinner plate. And when the lift has been running, the bearing housing is warm to the touch and stays warm for a couple of hours. The lift had not been run since the 12th of April. The main breaker was off. I had the key to the operator's panel on the same ring as everything else on that mountain, and it was in my pocket. On the 28th of June, I walked past the bottom terminal at 7 in the morning on my way to the pump house, and I put my hand on the bull wheel housing without thinking about it, the way you touch a door frame. It was warm. I stood there with my hand on it. It was 51 degrees out, and everything else in that basin was cold, and I had my hand on a bearing that had a whole night of frost on the steel around it and no frost at all on the housing itself. I went and looked at the panel. Breaker off, lock on the breaker, my lock. I got up on the terminal deck and looked at the haul rope, at the way it sat in the wheels, and there is a thing you can see if you know a lift, which is a little bit of scale and rust dust that collects on top of the wheels when a rope is not moved. The wheel train at Tower 1 was clean. I called June that Tuesday, and I told her the bull wheel was warm, and she said, "That is the sun." I said it was 7 in the morning, and the sun was not on it. And she was quiet for a second, and then she said, "Emmett, do not let that mountain get in your head." She said it lightly. She said, "The first summer I did it, I heard a piano." I laughed, and she laughed, and we talked about the pump, and I hung up. I have thought about that. I have thought about it a great deal. June Sackett grew up on that hill, and she has been up there in the summer alone, and she said the word piano, and then she moved right along. And 11 weeks later, when it was all over, I asked her about it, and she said she did not remember saying that. The tracks were the 4th of July. I went into the maintenance shop in the morning, and there was dust on the floor, the way there is always dust on the floor of a shop, and coming in from the big roll-up door across the bay to the bottom of the stairs, and then back out again, there were boot prints, a lug sole, a common tread, the same tread that was on the boots on my feet, which is the same tread that is on about half the boots in the Mountain West. There were 9 prints coming in and 9 going out. I counted them twice, and then I got down on my knees and put my own boot next to one. It was the same size. Now, I had walked across that floor 100 times. What made me get down on my knees was that the dust had come in overnight. The roll-up door leaks and the dust comes off the road and it collects, and every couple of weeks I sweep it, and I had swept that floor on the 2nd. So there were prints and 2 days of dust made by my boot in a shop I had not walked into since I swept it, because I had been up on the ridge lift line the 3rd and I had come in the side door. I stood in that shop with a cup of coffee in my hand, and I did the arithmetic I am sure any man would do. I decided I was wrong about the side door. I decided I had come in the big door and not remembered. I have looked at that decision from every angle since. It was the right decision to make with what I had. That is the thing about all of it. Every single decision I made that summer was the right decision to make with what I had, and I got where I got anyway. Then the phone started. The first time was the 16th of July, in the afternoon, in daylight. I was in the shop with the arc welder going, and there was nothing on this earth louder than a shop with a welder in it, and I stopped to change rod and I heard the tail end of a ring. Too short. That is the shop's code. Too short means somebody is calling the shop. I stood there with my hood up and the rod in my hand, and I looked at that black box on the wall. And I want to tell you what I thought, because it is the most ordinary thought a man ever had, and I hate it now. I thought, huh, and I went and I picked it up. I said hello. There was a hiss on the line. Old copper on poles for 1.5 miles up a lift line makes a hiss. Under it there was nothing. No breathing, no wind, no static pop. I said hello again. Then I said, June? Which was ridiculous, because June is on the outside line in the base office, and the outside line does not talk to the intercom, and there is no way for June Sackett to be on that circuit, and I knew all of that, and I said her name anyway because a man with a phone in his hand says a name into it. I hung up. I went back to welding. That evening I did what a reasonable man does, which is that I walked up to the Sister Bottom shack and I looked at the phone. Then I got in the truck and I drove the service road as far as it goes, and I hiked to the Sister Top shack and looked at that one. Then I went up to the nest, all 4 hanging in the cradle, nobody up there. Grass across the doorway of the nest that had not been walked on since spring. I came back down at dark with the headlamp on, and I was cheerful about it, and I made a pork chop, and it was one of the best evenings of my whole life, and I did not know it. Between the 16th of July and the 9th of August, the phones rang 11 times. Always in the day at first, always the shop code, always the hiss and nothing. I stopped picking up around the 4th one. I want credit for that, and I am not sure I deserve any, because the reason I stopped picking up was not that I was afraid, it was that I had gotten annoyed. I had decided that there was a short somewhere in that line, that a limb was down on the wire up the lift line and swinging in the afternoon breeze and touching the pair, and that when the wind came up in the afternoon it made the ringer trip. That is a real thing that happens. Any lineman will tell you. So on the 24th of July I walked the whole intercom line, 1.5 miles, up the lift towers where it is lashed to the tower legs with binoculars, looking for a limb across it. There is no timber within 40 feet of that line. The cut is 100 feet wide. It was cleared in 1968, and it has been mowed by winter ever since. I found one thing. At Tower 11, about halfway up the hill, the pair leaves the tower on a standoff bracket, and the 2 wires had been separated. Somebody had taken the pair and pulled the 2 conductors apart from each other, gently, for about 18 inches, so that they made a long, thin oval, like an eye, and the insulation was not broken anywhere. Wire does not do that. Wind does not do that. It takes hands and it takes patience, and it does not accomplish one thing electrically. I stood at the bottom of Tower 11 and looked up at it until my neck hurt. Then I climbed the tower with the tools, and I twisted the pair back together, because I am a caretaker, and that is what I am there for. And it never once occurred to me until I was on the ground again that I had just put a broken thing back in working order. Ollie Cardenas came up on the 6th and 7th of August to do the rope work. He is the lift mechanic. He is 62, and he has run rope on that hill for 31 years, and he is the only man June trusts with a splice. And twice a summer he comes up for 2 days and does the things a caretaker is not allowed to touch. He brought his own trailer and parked it behind the shop, and we worked. It was good. I had not talked to a person in 9 weeks, and I did not know how much I had wanted to until he got out of the truck. We ran the grip tests. We pulled a chair and looked at it. He told me about his daughter, and I told him about nothing, and he did not push, which is why he is welcome anywhere. At about 10:30 the first night, we were sitting on the tailgate of his truck with a beer, and the shop phone rang. Too short. Ollie looked at the shop. I said, "It does that." He set the beer down on the tailgate. He did it the way a man sets a thing down when his hands need to be empty. He said, "What do you mean it does that?" I said, "There is a short in the line somewhere. It rings a couple times a week." And Ollie Cardenas, who is not a nervous man, who has hung off a haul rope over a 200-foot gap in a snowstorm, said, "Emmett, I ran that pair in '96. Where is the short?" I said I could not find it. He said, "Is it always too short?" I said, "Yeah, now that you mention it," and I laughed a little. He did not laugh. He sat there on that tailgate and looked at the black windows of the shop. He said, "A short does not know the code." That is all he said, and I have hung 11 years and a whole summer on that one sentence. A short does not know the code. The second night, at about 1 in the morning, all 5 phones rang 4 long, and Ollie came out of his trailer in his shorts. I was already outside. I had been sitting on the shop steps since midnight because I had stopped sleeping much. We stood in that parking lot together in the dark and listened to the phones ring up the mountain, the top shack and the nest, thin and far off, 4 long, and then it quit. Ollie went inside the shop and turned on the lights and stood in front of the phone with his arms folded. He said, "Run the crank." I said, "What?" He said, "Crank it. Call somebody. See who picks up." I turned that crank 1 long, which is the base office, which was locked and empty and 400 yards away. We stood there and listened to the office phone ring across the parking lot, faintly, through 2 walls. It rang 4 times, and then it stopped ringing. Ollie had the handset up to his ear. I watched his face. He is a dark-complected man, and I watched the color go out of the middle of it. He put the handset back in the cradle very carefully, like it was full of something. He said, "We are going to sleep in the same building tonight." He would not tell me what he heard. He would not tell me that night, and he would not tell me in the morning. And in the morning he loaded his trailer at 6:30 without eating, and he stood by the door of his truck with his hand on it. He said, "Emmett, come down with me." I said I had a job. He said, "June will get somebody." I said, "There is nobody. It is August. Who is she going to get?" And he stood there with his hand on the door of his truck for a good while, an old man who had known me for 2 days, and he said the useless thing, the thing that people say, the thing that is true and is not enough. He said, "Do not answer it." I said, "Answer what?" And he got in his truck and he drove down the county road, and he did not come back that summer. And June told me in September that he had told her he was done doing summer trips. I want to be fair to Ollie Cardenas. He gave me the only rule he had. It was a good rule. He was standing in a parking lot at 6:30 in the morning, trying to hand a man he barely knew the one thing he had learned in the night. And he did not have the words for the rest of it, because there are no words for the rest of it. Do not answer it. The night after Ollie left, I went up to the nest. I want to say why, because it was the last free choice I made up there, and I made it wrong. The nest sits on the summit at 8,100 feet. It is a hexagonal warming hut with a wood stove and a horseshoe of benches and windows on 5 sides, and the 6th wall has the phone on it and a door. In the winter, there are 40 people in there at any given moment drying their gloves on the stove and complaining. And in the summer, there is grass across the doorway and mouse droppings on the benches, and the whole thing smells like a barn. I hiked up the lift line in the afternoon and got there about 4. The grass across the doorway was flat, not walked through, flat, laid over in a fan going into the doorway, the way grass lies when something wide has come through it, and the width of the fan was a good deal wider than a man. I stood there for a while. Then I went in. The hut was exactly the way I left it in June. Benches, stove, mouse droppings, and the droppings had not been walked on, and I went over that floor with the light an inch at a time. Nothing had crossed that floor, and the handset was off the cradle. It was lying on the bench under the phone, on its side, with the cord looped once, neat. Something had come through the doorway wide enough to lay a fan in the grass, taken a telephone off a wall, put it down on a bench without touching the floor, and gone away. I picked it up and I put it back in the cradle, 'cause I am a caretaker. Then I walked down the lift line with the headlamp in the dark and got to the shop at 10:30, and I lay in bed, and at 2:10 in the morning the shop phone rang too short. I did not go down. And at 2:20, from a spot in the parking lot about 40 feet from the shop door, somebody turned on the water spigot on the side of the building. I lay there and listened to it run for 4 hours. There is a thing about that I have not been able to get past. It ran until dawn, and when I went out at first light it was still running, and there was a gully cut in the gravel, and I went and turned it off. Whatever had come out of the nest and down the mountain that night had wanted me to know it was standing next to the building, and it had not knocked on the door, and it had not said my name, and it had not come up the stairs. It turned on a faucet and let me listen. Because a man will lie in the dark and listen to running water for 4 hours and never once close his eyes, and it did not need to do anything more than that. I did not answer it. Not for 3 more weeks. And it did not matter, and I am going to explain why, because that is the only thing I have got that is worth anything to anybody. On the 11th of August, the phones rang at 2:10 in the morning, and after the ringing stopped, the shop handset came off the cradle. I heard it. I was lying in the bed over the shop with my eyes open, and I heard the little click and rattle of a handset coming out of a steel cradle 11 feet below me through a floor. And then Danny said, "Emmett." The handset was hanging on its cord. I know that because I found it hanging in the morning, swinging maybe 2 inches, and I stood on the stairs and looked at it swinging, and I did not go down and put it back for 4 hours. But that night at 2:10, that voice came up through the floorboards from a phone hanging off the wall in an empty shop. It said, "Emmett." It said, "Hey, hey, it is me." I did not go down the stairs. I have to be careful here, because I know how this sounds. It sounds like a man in a bed listening to a ghost. That is not what it was. That is not what it was like at all. What it was like is that it was 2:10 in the morning, and my brother was downstairs on the phone, and he needed a ride, and I was lying in a bed like a coward. That is what it was like. That is the whole horror of it. There was no cold hand on my neck. There was no dread. What there was the most familiar feeling in my entire life. The feeling of the phone ringing at 2 in the morning, and the flat, cold thing in my chest going down like a stone, and underneath the flat, cold thing, running under it and around it and through it, the plane wanted to go and get him. I lay in that bed with my hands over my face. He said, "I am at a Sinclair station." He said, "Emmett, are you there?" He said, "I know you are there." And after a while he said, "Okay." And the handset did not go back in the cradle. It said okay, and then there was nothing on the line, and a phone in an empty shop hung off its cord in the dark and swung. The next 3 weeks were the worst weeks of my life, and I understand that I am the one who chose them. That is the part I have never been able to make anybody understand, and it is the part that matters, and it is the reason I am putting the whole thing down. I could have left. Nothing was stopping me. The county road was open. It is 21 miles of washboard, and I had driven it 40 times. My truck ran. The road was dry. There was no snow in that country until October. Any hour of any day of those 3 weeks, I could have thrown a bag in the truck and been in Chandler in 50 minutes and had a beer at the Silver Dollar and been done with Cold Sister Basin forever, and June Sackett would have been annoyed and would have gotten over it, and the Marmots would have had Cabin 14. I want to say that again, because every story about a thing in the woods has a reason the man cannot leave. Snow, a broken leg, a wife who will not go. There was nothing. I drove down twice. The first time was the 14th of August, in the middle of the day. I got in the truck and I drove 9 miles down the county road, and I stopped in the middle of it and I sat there for maybe 20 minutes with the engine running and the dust settling around me. And then I turned around and I drove back up and I unpacked the bag and I went and mowed for 4 hours. The second time was the 22nd. I got to the cattle guard at the bottom 17 miles down where the road hits the pavement, and I stopped at the stop sign, and there was nobody coming in either direction, and I sat at that stop sign so long the truck got hot, and I turned right, which is up. I have had 2 years to say why, and here it is, and it is not a good answer. I stayed because it was talking to me in my brother's voice. That is it. That is all of it. I knew what it was, or I knew what it was not, which is the same thing where it counts. I did not believe for 1 minute that Daniel Pryor was in the maintenance shop of a ski area in the middle of the night. I am not that kind of a fool, and grief does not make a man that kind of a fool, whatever people think. And I stayed anyway, because for the first time in 11 years there was a sound in the world that was my brother, and it was saying my name, and it was waiting for me to say something back. Ollie's rule held. I did not answer. But nobody ever told me that there is more than one way to answer a thing, and that the last one is standing still and letting it talk. It came off the phones on the 18th. There is a public address system at Cold Sister. Horn speakers on poles at the base area and along the lift lines run off an amplifier in the base office, so that on a race day somebody can call a kid to the start shack. It is loud. It has to be loud enough to be heard over a lift and 100 people and wind. On the 18th of August, at about 11 at night, the amplifier in the base office came on. You can hear it come on. There is a thump and then a hum, and every horn on that mountain starts hissing. The base office was locked. I had the key in my pocket, and my brother's voice came out of 11 horn speakers at once, at a volume you could have heard in the next drainage, all over a mountain, off the rock walls of that basin, 400 yards up the lift line and back. Emmett, I was standing in the parking lot. I had been standing in the parking lot every night by then. Emmett, hey, it went on for 2 hours. I have tried to write down what those 12 sentences were, and I get about 4 of them before my hand quits. One of them was, I am not mad at you. One of them was, you can just come to the bottom of the hill. One of them was my own voice. Not his. Mine. Coming out of 11 horn speakers bolted to poles on a mountain in the dark, saying 3 words at a volume that shook the windows of the day lodge. Danny, I cannot. It played it 4 times. My voice, the way it sounded 11 years ago when I was younger, cracked in the middle of the second word. And I stood in that parking lot and heard the exact sound of the worst thing I ever did, rolling around the walls of that basin and coming back off the rock. And then it went back to his voice, calm, patient, on a rotation, like a man reading a lift ticket number. It was not screaming. That is the thing. It was the exact volume and tone of a man on a public address system reading a lift ticket number, calm, patient, saying the same 11 or 12 sentences in a rotation. And I stood in the middle of the parking lot with my hands at my sides, and I listened to every word of it, and I did not answer, and it made no difference at all. Because on the 19th of August, I woke up at 11 in the morning. I had never in my life slept past 6, and I woke up on top of the covers in my boots, and there was a caretaker's log on the desk in the base office where you write down what you did each day. June wants it, and I went down there that afternoon in a fog and opened it up, and the entry for the 18th was filled out in my handwriting. Ran pump. Mowed lower cabins. Greased ridge, tower 6. I did not do any of those things on the 18th. On the 18th, I sat on the shop steps from noon until dark, waiting for it to get dark. The grease fitting on ridge tower 6 had been hit. There was a fresh bead of it squeezed out around the wheel, and the cap was on the gun in the shop, and the gun was not where I keep it. I sat in that office and looked at my own handwriting until the light went off the window. Then I went out and I checked everything else. The pump had been run. The lower cabins had been mowed, and mowed well, in overlapping passes with the discharge turned away from the buildings, which is how I mow, which is how my father taught me to mow a lawn in 1984. The mower was in the shed with the fuel cap on and the gas shut off. And in the dust of the shed floor, there were boot prints, 9 in and 9 out, my size, my tread. I sat down on an upturned bucket in that shed, and I put my head in my hands, and I stayed there until my legs went to sleep. And it was the first moment in all of it that I understood I was in trouble, and not the kind of trouble I had been prepared for. I had spent 5 weeks guarding my mouth, watching a phone, refusing to pick it up, feeling righteous, in a small, ugly way, every night that I did not pick it up. And the whole time it had been standing at the edge of me the way a man stands at the edge of a field, and it had not needed my mouth at all. It had gotten in through the wanting. That is the thing nobody says. Everybody says do not answer it, and they mean do not talk to it, and they are pointing at the door and telling you to lock the door, and they do not know that the wall is gone. Every hour of every day for 5 weeks, I had wanted to go downstairs and pick up that phone. Every hour, not once, constantly. It was the water I was swimming in. It ran under my sleeping and under my mowing and under my pork chops. A whole man, all of him, all the time, leaning toward a voice. Leaning is answering. You cannot want a thing with your entire self for 5 weeks and call yourself silent. Your mouth is not the only door in the house, and it is not even the big one. The last week of August, I stopped pretending I was working, and I sat down and I thought. I sat in the base office, with the door locked, in the daylight, with the caretaker's log open in front of me and a pencil, and I did what I would do with any other problem on that hill, which is that I wrote down what I knew, and then I looked at it. I knew it had 4 long, a code that is not on the card. I knew it had my brother's voice. That was the one I could not get around, and I chewed on it for 2 days. There is not a recording of Danny anywhere. There is no video. He was gone before everybody had a phone in their pocket, and neither of us was the kind of family that took film of anything. So it did not get his voice from a machine. It got it out of me. There is no other place it could be. 11 years of a man in a bed at 2 a.m. running one phone call back and forth over the same 11 seconds of tape, and every time I ran it in his voice, and I ran it out loud sometimes. And once, in the truck outside a hardware store in a town I do not want to name, I said the whole thing out loud, both parts, mine and his, and then I sat there and cried for 20 minutes. Something had been listening for a long time, and it was not the kind of listening that needs ears. And I knew when I finally sat with it what it was asking for. It kept saying the same sentences. I wrote them out. It said, Emmett. It said, hey, it is me. It said, I am at a Sinclair station. It said, are you there? Every one of those is a setup. Every one of those is a straight line, and there is one answer to all of them, and I had given that answer 100 times in 15 years, in the dark on the edge of a bed with my head in my hand. Where are you? That is the sentence. That is all it ever wanted out of my mouth. Not a scream, not my name. 2 words a man says without thinking when somebody he loves tells him where he is. It is not even a question, really. It is a promise. Every man alive knows what where are you means when it is 2 a.m. It means stay put. It means I am coming. I sat in that office and I understood that if I ever said those 2 words into that phone, I would put my boots on and walk out into the basin, and I would keep walking, and everything after that would happen to somebody else in my body. And I understood at the same time, sitting in a wooden chair in a locked office in the daylight, that I had already been saying it, not out loud, with my whole self, every night for 5 weeks. Standing in a parking lot with my hands at my sides while a public address system said my name for 2 hours, and every fiber of me straining toward it, and my mouth shut, and my mouth being the only part of me that was shut. Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? It did not need me to say it. It was going to wear the sentence out of me the way water wears a stone, and it had all the time there is, and every single night I stood out there and gave it a little more of the stone. What I decided, I have never once been able to explain to anybody in a way that did not make them look at me sideways. I decided that I was not going to leave, not because I was brave, because I finally understood that I was not going to get away from it by driving down a county road. It had not been living in the basin. It was not in the copper. It had come up that mountain in my truck on the 9th of June, sitting in a photograph of a ski school class from 1989, sitting in 11 years of a phone call, and it would go down that road with me, and it would use a different set of speakers. The thing had made an offer. I had been standing in that parking lot for 3 weeks not saying yes to it, and I had convinced myself that not saying yes was the same as saying no. It is not. They are not even in the same country. So on the 31st of August at 11 o'clock at night, I put my boots on And I walked across the parking lot and I unlocked the base office and I turned on the light and I sat down at the desk and I picked up the phone. I want to describe that room because I was in it a long time. Pine paneling, a metal desk from the 60s with the drawers stuck, a rack of first aid gear on the wall and a map of the trails under glass and a coffee maker with an inch of something in the bottom of it. The caretaker's log. The window over the desk looks out at the base of the sister chair and past that at the mountain, which at 11 at night in August is a black shape with no stars in it. The intercom handset is on the wall to the left of the desk. Black steel, a crank on the side. I took it off the cradle and I put it against my ear. There was the hiss, and under the hiss there was a room. I do not know how else to put it. You can hear a room on a phone line. There is a size to it. And what was on the other end of that line was not a shop and it was not a lift shack. It was very large and there was something moving in it a long way off. I said, Danny. I said it out loud in an empty office at 11 at night into a phone that goes nowhere. And my brother said, hey. He said, Emmett, hey, I have been trying to get you. And I sat in that chair and I put my free hand flat on the desk to keep it there. I said, I know. He said, I am at a Sinclair station, and I want you to understand what happened in me, because it is the reason a man does not walk out of that basin, and it has nothing to do with courage or cowardice or belief. My mouth opened, and Where Are You was in it. It was in there, and it had weight, and it was moving. 11 years. 15 years before that. That sentence has a groove worn in me that goes down to the bone, and I sat in that chair with my hand on the desk and my mouth open, and I heard the front half of it start to come out, the woo sound, and I bit it off. He said, Emmett, he said, it is cold. There is nobody here. He said, you always come and get me. I sat there. There was sweat running down my ribs. On the other end of that line, the room breathed, in through a mouth and out through a mouth. And I said the thing I had been trying to say for 11 years, and I said it to something that was not my brother in an empty office at 11 at night with a phone in my hand that was not connected to anything on this earth. I said, Danny, I loved you my whole life. There was nothing on the line. I said I could not do it anymore. That is all it was. It was not that I stopped. I could not do it anymore, and I did not know how to tell you that, so I said I cannot. And I hung up on you, and I have thought about it every day since. I said, I am sorry. And there was a long silence, and I sat in that chair, and my eyes were running, and my nose was running, and I was gripping the edge of that desk with my left hand. And then, on the line, my brother said, softly, in the exact gentle voice he had used at 2 a.m, 11 years ago, on the 11th of March, okay? And then he said, so where are you? That is what it said. So, where are you? It turned it around. 11 weeks of patience, 5 weeks of a phone, 3 weeks of a man standing in a parking lot, and it had never been trying to get me to say the sentence. It had been teaching me the shape of the sentence so that I would recognize it as love when it came back the other direction. Where are you? Stay put. I am coming. I sat in that room and I looked at the black window and at the mountain in it, and out on that mountain, up the lift line, all the way at the top where the nest sits on the summit, with grass across the doorway. Something was standing at a wall phone waiting for a man to tell it where he was. It knew. Of course it knew. It had been in the shop. It had greased Tower 6. It wanted me to say it. It wanted the last door open from the inside. I said no, and I hung up first. I put that handset in the cradle while it was still on the line, with a click, the way you do. The same motion my hand has made 10,000 times. The same motion it made on the 11th of March at 2 a.m, 11 years ago, in a bedroom in a house I do not own anymore. And then I sat there. Nothing rang. I sat in that office with the light on until about 3 a.m, and nothing rang. And at 3 I turned off the light, and I sat in the dark, and at about 3:45 I heard it leave. It did not go up the mountain. It went down the county road. On foot, on gravel, along unhurried walking sound, going away, and I sat at that desk with my hands folded, and I listened to it for a long time, 20 minutes maybe. until the sound of it was thinner than the sound of the creek, and then it was gone. There is no cell service at Cold Sister Basin. I sat in the dark in a locked office, and I listened to something that had my brother's voice walk 21 miles toward a town of 900 people. The rest of September was the finest month of weather that Basin had in a decade. I mowed. I painted the north side of the day lodge, which had not been painted since June's father was alive. I did the tower walks. I ran the pump and the generator, and I found a marmot in cabin 14, and I ran him off. I slept 8 hours a night, every night. Nothing rang, not once. I checked the line at Tower 11, and it was fine. Nothing came off the cradle. The bull wheel was cold every morning. I have thought about it, and I think that is exactly right, and I think it means the opposite of what a man would hope. It did not stay to punish me. I have had 2 years on that, and here is where I have landed, and I do not like it. It never needed the sentence. It needed me to take the handset off the wall. Every hour of every night, for 3 weeks, it had been asking one question, and the question was not, "Where are you?" The question was, "Will you pick up?" And on the 31st of August, at 11 o'clock, I walked across a parking lot in the dark and unlocked a door and sat down and picked up. It got what it came for. Then it went and did the next thing. June Sackett came up on the 28th of September to close the hill. We put the plywood on the windows together, and we ate sandwiches on the tailgate of her truck in the sun, and she paid me, and she said the place looked better than it had in 15 years. And she meant it, and she asked me back for the next summer. I said I would let her know. She got quiet the way she does, and she looked out at the base of the sister chair for a while. Then she said, "That thing I said in June about the piano." I said, "You told me you did not remember saying it." And June Sackett, who is 66 years old and whose father built half of what is standing in that basin, looked at her sandwich and said, "I remember." And I said, "Well," and she said, "My dad used to say the mountain gets lonesome in the summer." And she looked up at me, and she was scared, and she was scared of me a little bit, and I understood that she had been scared since she got out of the truck. She said, "Emmett, you look all right." I said I was all right. She said, "Good." And she put her sandwich down, and she did not finish it. I drove down the county road at 4 in the afternoon on the 28th of September with everything I owned in the bed of the truck. At the cattle guard at the bottom, at the stop sign where I had sat in August with the engine getting hot, I stopped and I looked both ways, and there was nobody coming in either direction, and I turned left. That was 2 years ago. I live in Chandler. It is a town of 900 people, and I moved here on purpose, and I could not tell you why, except that it seemed important not to go far. I work nights at a warehouse on the highway. I load trucks. It is a young man's job, and I am not one, and my back tells me so, and I do not care. It is dark when I go in, and it is dark when I come out, and there is nobody to talk to for 8 hours, and the noise is the kind of noise that fills a man up. I sleep in the day. I do not sleep well, and I have made my peace with it. There is a man on my shift named Boyd who has tried for 2 years to get me to come to a card game on Thursdays, and last winter he finally asked me straight out what my deal was, and I told him I did not have one, and he said, "Everybody has one." I said, "All right." I said, "My brother went missing 11 years ago, and I did not look for him." And Boyd, who is 31 and has never lost anything, said the thing that people say, which is that I should not blame myself, and that Danny made his own choices, and that there was nothing I could have done. I said, "There was one thing." He waited for me to say what it was, and I went and loaded a truck. There was one thing. It was 2 words, and it took about half a second, and it did not cost anything, and it would not have saved him, and I know that. And I have known it for 11 years. Where are you? That is all. That is the whole of what I owed my brother and did not pay, and the only creature in this world that ever understood exactly what those 2 words were worth was standing at a wall phone on the summit of a mountain in the dark, waiting. Renee heard. Somehow. She sent a card. It said 1 line, and I keep it in a drawer. I did not go back to Cold Sister. June hired a kid from Spokane, and he lasted 3 weeks and quit, and she has not filled it since. And The summer before last, a tree came down on the county road above the switchbacks and nobody moved it, and now nothing goes up there at all. Here is the part I have to put down, and then I am done. In April, a woman at the hardware store on Main told me a fella had come in asking after me. She said he was polite. She said he did not leave a name. She said he asked if Emmett Pryor still came in, and she said sure he does, and the fella said okay, and he thanked her and he went out. I said, what did he look like? And she thought about it and she said he was maybe 50 something, thin, kind of a long face. She said he had a way of talking to you like he already knew you. She said, honestly, he looked a little like you. Daniel Pryor was 40 when I hung up on him. I never saw him at 50. Nobody did. There is no photograph, no description, no witness anywhere on this earth to what my brother's face looked like at 51 years old, except in the head of a man who has spent 11 years lying awake imagining it. I had the phone put in that same week. The company sent a boy out and he ran a line into the kitchen and he asked me if I wanted the caller identification service and I said no. He put the jack in the wall by the table and he plugged it in and he handed me the handset and asked me to check for dial tone. I listened to it. It was fine. I have not given the number to anybody. It is not in a book. There is nobody in this world who would have any reason to call it. I sit at that table most nights when I get home at about 4 in the morning with the light off, and I put my hands flat on the table on either side of it, and I look at it. I do not know what I am going to say, but I put it in, and I keep the ringer on, and every night I sit down in that chair. So I already know what I am going to do.